Hi guys, and welcome to Relaxing History Time. Tonight we're going to journey back to a time before modern houses existed when surviving. The winter was a daily struggle, and people had to rely on ingenuity, resilience, and the land itself to endure the harshest of seasons. Imagine for a moment stepping outside into a world where the cold is as fierce as the night is long. Your breath hangs in the air like fog freezing the moment it leaves your lungs. The wind bites cutting through your layers, and the snow crunches underfoot, the only sound you can hear as you trudge through the stillness of the world. It's a time before electric heaters, before thermal blankets, before cozy homes and central heating. The winter landscape is a vast, unforgiving expanse, and surviving it takes more than just courage. It takes resourcefulness, community, and a deep connection to the land. You probably won't survive this if you're transported back in time, but don't worry, we're here to learn about it in the safest, coziest way possible. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know where you're from and what time it is where you are. I'd love to hear about your corner of the world. Now dim the lights, make sure you're nice and warm, and let's dive into this winter tale. Long before the luxury of modern homes and heated spaces, winters were an entirely different reality. The world felt colder then, not just because of the freezing temperatures, but because the ability to fight back against the cold was a luxury few could afford. You might have woken up in a small one-room shelter, possibly made of wood, stone, or even earth, with little more than a flickering fire to ward off the chill. There were no windows to trap the heat, no insulation to keep the cold out. You'd find yourself bundled up in layers of animal skins or woven cloth, the cold air creeping in from every corner. But the real challenge wasn't just surviving the cold, it was still living with it. And every single winter was a test of human will and ingenuity. Historians still argue whether early humans truly understood the science behind cold weather survival, but they knew without a doubt that survival depended on finding ways to trap heat and shelter from the elements. Shelters were often simple, constructed from the materials most readily available like branches, mud, or animal hides. These crude homes may not have offered much in terms of comfort, but they offered the best defense against the cold that early humans had. In early societies, the hearth was the heart of the home. A central fire would burn day and night, providing warmth, light, and a means to cook food. But unlike the modern fire you're accustomed to in a cozy living room, the ancient hearth wasn't surrounded by four walls. The smoke had to escape somehow, often seeping through cracks in the roof, leaving the inside of the shelter with a permanent scent of wood smoke and a layer of soot. There were no modern chimneys to carry the smoke safely outside, just a fire that might flicker out in a strong gust of wind. And when it did, the cold returned stronger than before. But it wasn't all bleak. While these primitive homes offered little in terms of modern comfort, they did have a charm of their own. The warmth from a fire shared by a family, the crackling sounds of wood burning, the quiet conversations exchanged in the flickering glow, all of these small moments made life bearable in an unforgiving environment. Imagine, though, the sense of vulnerability. The cold, relentless and constant, would creep in at night, and you would have no choice but to pull your fur-covered blanket tighter around your shoulders, hoping it would be enough to see you through until morning. In the most severe winters, even the strongest shelter couldn't protect you from the cold. People died from exposure from frostbite, from the slow, painful effects of hypothermia that came with spending too long in freezing conditions. Some early cultures, like the Inuit, adapted to these challenges by building shelters made of snow igloos that acted as natural insulators, but even then survival wasn't guaranteed. What kept the cold at bay was a combination of resourcefulness, clever design, and sheer determination. And then there were the clothes. The clothes you wore were more than just garments, they were tools of survival. Thick furs, layered leather, and woven fabrics were the first line of defense against the elements. Early humans living in close-knit communities learned how to use every part of the animals they hunted, from their meat for food to their pelts for warmth. The clothes they wore were not just functional, they were an extension of their relationship with the world around them. Imagine slipping into a heavy cloak made of fox fur or reindeer hide the warmth from the animal's coat, now your own. But even with the warmth of a fire and the protection of thick clothing, the cold still loomed an ever-present threat. This constant battle between warmth and cold fire and frost was the reality for those who lived before the luxury of modern housing. And it wasn't just about surviving the cold, it was about managing every aspect of your life to endure it. What you ate, where you slept, how you dressed, all of these decisions had to be carefully considered. For in winter, one misstep could mean the difference between survival and death. As you continue to imagine yourself in this cold world, remember that even the most well-prepared didn't always make it through the winter unscathed. The dead of winter was a time when nature showed no mercy. The winters were long, the nights long and dark. With no way to track the passing days, the people of the past lived with a sense of timelessness. They didn't know when the frost would relent, when the first signs of spring would come creeping across the land. All they knew was that they had to hold on, find warmth in whatever way they could, and trust that somehow they would make it through. The first people to experience these harsh winters were not just surviving, they were thriving, creating the very foundation of human ingenuity that would continue to evolve over thousands of years. Their connection to the environment, to the cold, was something we can hardly comprehend today. We sit in our warm homes, sipping hot drinks, reading books, and we might forget how harsh the winter was before the technology we take for granted was even a thought. But back then, everything was a struggle, and every small victory was a testament to the resilience of humanity. So as you lie back and settle into the warmth of your bed, remember those who lived without the comforts we enjoy today. Their survival through winter wasn't guaranteed, but their determination that never wavered. As you continue to settle in, let your mind drift back even further to a time when the very concept of comfort was foreign and surviving. The winter meant mastering the elements. Imagine the world as it was then, vast, untamed and cold. The trees that now stand tall and proud with their thick trunks and leafy branches were once bare skeletons, their bark stripped by harsh winds. The earth beneath your feet is a hard frozen crust cracked from the bitter cold. You can see your breath in the air, but there's no warmth, no gentle heating system to keep your skin from the chill. In the absence of today's luxuries, people were forced to turn to nature for everything: food, shelter, warmth, and their survival depended on how well they could understand and adapt to the world around them. In these early winters, survival meant building shelter that could withstand both the biting wind and the weight of snow that seemed to fall endlessly. The shelters of the time were often temporary, constructed quickly, and with whatever materials could be found. Small structures built of wood and stone with walls that were barely thick enough to block the freezing winds provided the foundation for life during the colder months. Picture yourself inside one of these rudimentary homes. The walls are thick with frost, and the roof is low, sagging under the weight of snow that has fallen through cracks. Yet there is warmth in the centre of the room where a fire burns bright. But as the wind howls outside, it's a constant reminder that survival isn't just about warmth, it's about the constant vigilance required to stay alive. Communities, though sparse, often gathered in these small shelters, huddling together for warmth. These early homes weren't designed for comfort, they were designed for survival. Space was cramped and privacy was rare, but the bonds of the people inside were strengthened by necessity. In the coldest months, every member of the group had a role to play. Some tended the fire, keeping it stoked and ensuring the food didn't burn. Others repaired the walls, patching up leaks and trying to prevent the frigid winds from making their way in. Every small task had a larger purpose, keeping everyone alive. Historians still argue whether ancient communities understood the full extent of the risks they faced in the winter months, but it's clear that they adapted in remarkable ways. The tight-knit nature of these communities was a survival strategy, one born out of necessity rather than choice. The physical closeness helped trap body heat, a small but important factor in such a cold world. But it also helped emotionally during the darkest months of winter, when the days were short and the nights endless. These close-knit communities were a source of support. The warmth of companionship, of shared stories and laughter might have been as essential to survival as the fire itself. Of course, there were no windows to let in the light, no heavy curtains to keep out the cold. The fire burned low, leaving long shadows across the room. The walls were thin, barely offering any protection from the wind that would howl through cracks in the shelter. The chill would seep in from every direction, making it impossible to fully escape the winter. But this was a reality that early humans had to face every single year. And yet, despite the hardships, there was a strange beauty to it all. The simplicity of life, the constant struggle against the elements, created a deep bond between people and the land they inhabited. As you lie in your bed now, surrounded by the warmth of your blankets, consider what it would be like to live in a shelter like this. You'd have to be strategic, never wasting the warmth from the fire, always conserving your energy, to ensure you'd have enough to survive the next day. The first rays of the sun would be the only comfort you'd have, marking the start of another cold day. There was no luxury of a warm bed, a hot shower, or even the assurance that the fire would last through the night. Each day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to survive. When we think about winter survival in ancient times, we often picture rugged individuals fighting against the elements. But the truth is, survival wasn't just about individual strength. It was about the strength of the community. Families and small groups of people learned how to work together in the harshest conditions. The fire wasn't just a source of heat. It was the heart of the shelter, the thing that bound them all together. It was what kept them alive, both physically and emotionally. Without it, they would have perished. You might also wonder what it felt like to be outside during these winters, away from the shelter and exposed to the full force of the elements. The wind, sharp and biting, would slice through your clothes, cutting straight to the bone. Every step in the snow would be slow heavy as you trudged through the deep drifts. You might hear the creaking of branches as they bent under the weight of the snow, or the crunch of snow underfoot, the only sounds in a world that seemed to be held in the grip of winter. With no modern conveniences to fall back on, every journey outside felt like a battle with nature itself. But there was also a beauty to it, a stark icy beauty. The snow would cover the landscape in a blanket of white, transforming the world into something both beautiful and dangerous. The stillness of the world would become overwhelming, and you would feel the weight of the silence broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the sound of snowflakes falling. Even in this harsh landscape, life still continued. The animals that survived the winter, the faint signs of life that showed through the snow, all of it reminded you that life in some form always finds a way. But survival wasn't just about keeping warm or finding food. It was about understanding the rhythms of the seasons, learning how to adapt and prepare for the long, dark months ahead. Early humans didn't just wait for winter to pass, they made it their ally. They hunted and gathered, storing food for the months ahead. They adapted their clothing, crafted tools that could withstand the cold, and built shelters that, while rudimentary, were enough to provide protection from the worst of the elements. The wisdom of these early peoples, born of necessity and passed down through generations, is something we can hardly appreciate today. But without it, the modern comforts we take for granted wouldn't have been possible. So as you lie there warm and comfortable, take a moment to imagine the world without the luxury of a heated home, without the promise of spring. Instead, imagine the endless winter, the struggle to stay warm, and the close-knit communities that held it all together. It was a world where survival wasn't guaranteed, but where every step forward was a victory. As the fire flickers in the corner of your shelter, you begin to realize that the cold isn't just an inconvenience. It's not simply the biting chill of winter that makes survival so difficult, it's the endless, unyielding struggle to keep warm. The shelter you're in, however rudimentary, is a lifeline, but it's just the beginning. Once the harsh winds of winter begin to settle in your shelter, it becomes your world. There's no escaping it. No warm cafes or cozy restaurants to retreat to when the cold sets in. There's only the fire, the walls of your home, and the thin weathered roof above your head. You've learned to keep your space small, every inch used for warmth, every corner maximized for shelter. In these early times, it wasn't just the cold inside your home that was a threat, it was the cold that waited outside. The land covered in snow seemed to stretch on endlessly. The forest, now bare and silent, became places of danger. Animals struggled just as much as humans did to find food and shelter, and predators driven by hunger became a serious threat. The land, which might have once seemed full of promise, now appeared only as an unforgiving wasteland. You can feel the weight of the cold pressing in on every side. Outside, the wind howls, rattling the thin walls, carrying with it a chill so deep that even the fire struggles to compete. In that moment, you can't help but wonder how early humans managed to keep up the fight, what kept them going when the very air seemed to want to steal away their warmth. Historians still argue whether early humans understood how to manipulate the land and the elements, but one thing is certain: they had to rely on their ingenuity, their adaptability, and their deep understanding of nature's rhythms to survive. They learnt through trial and error what worked to protect themselves from the cold and what didn't. The shelters they built weren't just homes. They were finely tuned machines designed to trap as much heat as possible. Every wall, every layer of animal skins, every stack of firewood was chosen with care to maximize warmth. And yet it was never guaranteed. The difficulty of surviving in winter was most apparent when it came to food. In the dead of winter, many of the plants and crops that had provided sustenance during the warmer months were gone, buried under a blanket of snow or too frozen to be useful. For early people, this meant hunting. The landscape was harsher, the game harder to find, and the risk of injury or failure was constant. But that didn't stop them. People braved the cold, venturing out into the frozen wilderness to track and kill animals, and their survival depending on the success of each hunt. Can you imagine being out there trudging through the snow, hoping to bring home something to eat? Every step would feel heavy, weighed down, not just by the snow, but by the sheer determination it took to endure the cold. Food, when it could be found, had to be preserved for the long winter. People used every trick they knew to make it last: salting, smoking, drying, and storing. The resources they had to work with were often limited, and waste was never an option. You might find yourself spending hours carefully preserving meat, knowing that it could be weeks before you'd have another chance to gather food. Imagine the satisfaction of seeing your stores full, knowing you'd made it through another year of winter. And yet there was always the question of whether you'd make it through the next one. The challenge of finding food wasn't just physical, it was mental. The constant threat of scarcity, the pressure to keep finding sustenance weighed heavily on the people who lived through these winters. How did they cope with the stress and the uncertainty of survival? Some historians believe that the mental toll of living through such harsh conditions led to the development of community rituals, traditions, and beliefs that helped people stay focused. Even when the food was scarce and the cold too much to bear, people turned to their community for support. Sharing meals, telling stories, singing songs, these small acts of camaraderie helped people push through the darkest days of winter. But even these traditions couldn't shield everyone from the dangers of the season. For some, the cold simply came too quickly, or the food was too scarce to last. Others might have fallen ill during the winter months with illnesses that were worsened by the cold. The winter months became a time of loss, and the physical and emotional toll on those who survived was immense. It's easy to think of early winters as a simple test of endurance, but in truth they were a constant battle, one that took everything people had just to stay alive. While modern homes offer warmth and security, early shelters were much more fragile. The fire that burned in the centre of your shelter was your lifeline, but it could be extinguished in an instant by the howling winds outside. Imagine the panic of seeing the fire flicker out, knowing that the warmth would soon follow. What did people do when their last source of warmth vanished? They fought, of course, with whatever means they had. There was no waiting for help or relying on the comforts of modern life. There was just the cold and the instinct to survive. You can imagine the weight of the days growing longer as the cold set in. It wasn't just the physical hardship of surviving the cold, it was the uncertainty. How long would it last? How long could people keep up the fight? There was no clock to mark the passing of time, no heat to signify the change of seasons. All they had was the warmth of the fire, the closeness of their companions, and the hope that spring would come. Yet even with all their effort, many wouldn't survive the winter, and those who did were forever changed. They had learnt the harshest lesson of all, that survival wasn't just about strength or resourcefulness, it was about perseverance in the face of the unknown. And so you lie there now, wrapped in warmth, thinking of the lives lived long before the convenience of modern heating, before the luxury of hot water and insulated walls. You might never know the struggle of those early winters, but their resilience is something we carry with us. Their ingenuity, their connection to the land, and their determination to survive. It all lives on in the shelters we now call home. You find yourself once again near the warmth of the fire, its glow dancing on the walls of your shelter. The flicker of light offers a fleeting sense of comfort in a world where warmth is anything but guaranteed. It's a familiar scene, but one that carries with it a deeper significance. As you sit and watch the flames consume the firewood, it's easy to forget the long history behind humanity's relationship with fire, especially in the context of winter survival. In ancient times, fire wasn't just for cooking or light. It was the single most important tool for survival. Imagine how different life must have been without the luxury of modern technology. No electric stoves, no electric heaters, no cozy blankets with built-in heat, just the raw primal need to keep warm. Every ember that cracked from the fire was a reminder of just how essential fire was, not only for warmth, but for the continuation of life itself. In the early days, fire wasn't as easily controlled as it is today. There were no matches, no lighters to spark a flame at will. Early humans had to work with what they had, which meant gathering dry materials and lighting them through friction or flint. Can you picture yourself gathering sticks and stone, trying to create enough spark to light the fire that would carry you through another night of freezing temperatures? Every fire was a victory, a delicate dance of preparation and patience. Historians still argue whether the abilities to create fire was more of a learned skill or an instinctual breakthrough. But one thing is certain, it transformed the way humans lived. The moment early humans harnessed fire, they gained a tool that would change their world forever. Fire in its rawest form could easily become a source of destruction. The same warmth that could save lives could also destroy entire settlements. Early people had to develop not only the means to create fire, but the wisdom to control it. The hearth at the centre of every home was carefully constructed to contain the flames and protect the inhabitants, but the risk was ever present. The unpredictability of fire became a daily concern. Could the shelter withstand the smoke? Would the fire burn out before morning? Could the family stay warm enough to make it through the night? These were the constant questions people had to answer in order to survive. A quirky tidbit about fire. Did you know that early humans, long before modern technology, would have used fire not only for warmth, but for defense as well? Early tribes used fire as a protective barrier against wild animals, particularly predators. The scent of smoke acted as a deterrent, keeping wolves, bears, and other dangerous creatures at bay. In this way, fire wasn't just something to huddle around. It was a weapon, a symbol of control over the elements and the wild world that surrounded early human settlements. As you sit back and let the warmth from your modern fire fill the room, you can imagine how essential it would have been to keep such a flame alive in the ancient world. People would have gathered around the hearth not only for warmth, but for safety. A family or a small community all huddled together to share what little warmth they had would have formed a kind of social contract around the fire. It wasn't just a physical necessity, it was also a social and cultural one. The hearth provided a space for storytelling, for passing down the knowledge, for creating a shared history. Early humans knew that the fire represented life itself, and it became central to the communal identity. In many cultures, the hearth was also a sacred space. It was common for families to pray to fire gods or deities associated with warmth and the hearth. These rituals passed down through generations reflected the deeply held belief that fire was a gift from the gods, a blessing that had to be treated with reverence. Scholars still debate whether fire worship was a widespread practice across early human cultures or if it was more isolated to specific regions. But there's no denying its importance in the early human imagination. Fire wasn't just a tool, it was a force of nature, a living thing that required respect. The creation of fire may have been the breakthrough that allowed early humans to settle in colder climates, but it wasn't the only thing that kept them warm. Clothing, too, played a vital role in surviving the winter months. Imagine stepping outside, feeling the icy wind cut through your skin, and realizing that the furs and skins you've wrapped around yourself are your last line of defense. Without them, the cold would be unbearable, a constant assault on your body. Furs from animals like bears, deer, and rabbits were more than just garments. They were armor against the chill. Early people learned to create layers of clothing from thick outer coats to inner layers that trapped heat. These garments, though simple by today's standards, were meticulously crafted and provided the necessary insulation to survive the coldest winters. Historians still argue about the exact techniques used by early cultures to prepare animal skins for use as clothing, but one thing is clear: it wasn't an easy process. The skin had to be tanned, softened, and treated with natural oils to make it flexible and waterproof. The amount of time and effort that went into creating each garment was immense, but the result was worth it. These fur-lined cloaks, boots, and hats kept the cold at bay, allowing people to survive even the harshest conditions. Every piece of clothing was a product of the land, a direct result of the animals that lived in the area. The more one hunted, the more one learned about the environment, and the better prepared they were for the next winter. You might wonder how these early humans managed to stay comfortable in these heavy fur-covered clothes. The answer lies in the way they interacted with their environment. Early peoples didn't just throw on their coats and hope for the best, they adapted their clothing to the specific needs of the season. On particularly cold days, they would layer their furs wearing multiple coats over each other to trap as much warmth as possible. They would also insulate their feet using thick boots, stuffed with straw or fur to keep their toes from freezing. This attention to detail was essential for survival, and it was something that had been perfected over centuries of trial and error. As the fire continues to crackle in the hearth, consider how integral these furs were to survival. Without them, the cold would have been impossible to face. And as you lie in the warmth of your modern home, it's easy to forget just how much effort went into staying warm in the ancient world. It wasn't just about building a house, it was about building a life, one where survival depended on every decision from the clothes you wore to the fire you kept burning. As you sit comfortably imagining yourself once again in the harsh winter landscape of ancient times, the crackling fire in the corner seems a small comfort against the vast, unforgiving cold that surrounds you. The wind howls outside, pushing against the walls of your shelter, with a fury that feels like nature itself trying to pry its way in. Yet here you are, safe for the moment, surrounded by warmth. In these early times, though, warmth wasn't a luxury. It was the difference between life and death. The heat from a single fire could mean the survival of an entire family or group. But how did people in these distant eras keep the fire going day after day through the bitter, endless winter nights? How did they ensure that their homes didn't become nothing more than cold, forgotten shells? Fire was in a way both a gift and a constant challenge. While it was vital for warmth, cooking, and protection, it was also a tricky beast to tame. You see, early humans didn't have the matches or lighters we rely on today. To start a fire, they had to depend on more primal methods like striking flint against stone or rubbing two pieces of wood together to create friction. Imagine the patience required to make fire in this way, the hours spent trying to get that spark to watch as it slowly became a flame. And if you failed, you'd have to start again. Each small fub was a testament to the persistence required to survive in such an unforgiving world. It's a quirky thought, really, how much effort, how much time was spent on something we now take for granted in the modern world. Historians continue to discuss how fire was first discovered, with some speculating that it may have been accidental. Perhaps a lightning strike ignited a forest, or a spark from a rock led to the discovery of fire-making techniques. What's fascinating is that this discovery, or rather this mastery over fire, is what allowed early humans to endure the cold winters that could otherwise have wiped out entire communities. Fire was much more than a tool, it was the foundation for survival. And much like the homes that early humans built, the fire was a constant companion, one that demanded care, attention, and skill. But fire wasn't the only thing early people had to rely on during winter. Clothing, as we have already discussed, was a crucial part of survival. However, there were other, more unusual methods of keeping the cold at bay. Some cultures, particularly those in the far north, had ingenious ways of using their environment to protect themselves. For example, the Inuit people, masters of cold weather survival, developed clothing made from animal skins that not only kept them warm, but also allowed for the necessary mobility to hunt and gather food. Imagine stepping out into the frigid air surrounded by snow, but feeling protected wrapped in furs and skins that were perfectly suited to your environment. What's even more remarkable is that these clothes didn't just offer warmth, they also offered adaptability. In such an extreme environment, you needed to be able to adjust quickly to sudden changes in weather, and the layered clothing systems used by these early cultures provided exactly that. Early humans knew that flexibility was key. Too much heat and you would sweat and risk becoming cold once you stopped moving. Too little and you'd freeze. But clothing alone couldn't keep the cold away. There was a deeper connection to the land, to the weather, to the way life shifted with each passing season. Scholars still debate whether early humans understood the science behind body temperature regulation as we do today, but what is clear is that they learned over time how to respond to their environment. They had a deeply intuitive understanding of how to dress for warmth, how to manage fire, and how to plan for the long winter months. It wasn't just about surviving the season, it was about living through it with the knowledge that spring, while distant, would eventually return. The preparation for winter wasn't a last-minute rush. It was something that needed to be done well in advance. Every family or group would gather supplies, food, firewood, animal skins, and make sure their shelters were secure. For the early peoples who lived in colder climates, the preparation wasn't just about physical survival. It was mental survival too. The endless nights of winter, the isolation, the silence of snow-covered forests, these were conditions that could test even the strongest minds. The cold, while relentless, also brought with it a kind of peace. The rhythm of the seasons became a part of everyday life. The stillness of winter, while difficult, was also something that provided time for reflection. The harshness of the cold forced people to slow down to be present in their surroundings. The fire, the animal skins, the close-knit communities, they all created an environment where survival wasn't just a matter of brute strength, but of patience and understanding. In many ways, winter became a time for humans to connect not only with the land, but with each other. It was a time when social bonds were strengthened. Families would come together, gathering around the fire to share food stories and warmth. The long nights allowed for reflection and shared experiences, which in turn helped people prepare for the challenges of the coming months. It wasn't just the fire that kept people warm, it was the collective effort to stay close to share what little warmth they had and to keep each other's spirits up. Imagine yourself now sitting by that fire, the warmth enveloping you as you share stories with your fellow survivors. The cold outside is so powerful, so encompassing that it makes you even more aware of how precious that fire is. The light from the flames flickers against the walls of your shelter, casting long shadows, and for a moment you forget about the challenges of survival. The heat from the fire creates a cocoon of warmth around you, but even here in this small shelter you're never truly free from the threat of winter. Outside the world is still frozen, still harsh, still unforgiving. But inside, with the warmth of the fire and the closeness of others, you know you're as prepared as you can be. Historians still argue whether early humans were more resourceful than we give them credit for, but one thing is clear: without the ability to make fire to gather together and to adapt to their environment, they wouldn't have survived the winters that seem so daunting to us today. So as you settle back into your warm space wrapped in blankets, take a moment to appreciate the modern comforts we so easily take for granted, and remember the ingenuity, resourcefulness, and resilience of those who lived through winters without the luxuries we now have. You've probably never thought much about food storage on a cold winter day, but imagine it now during these ancient winters. Your survival doesn't only depend on keeping warm and sheltered, it hinges on whether or not you can find and preserve enough food to last through the long dark months. In this time before refrigeration, before canned goods and frozen meals, food preservation was an art and a necessity. Once the frost began to settle over the land, gathering food wasn't just a daily chore, it was an urgent mission. The ability to keep food from spoiling was the difference between enduring the winter and running out of supplies far too soon. Picture yourself walking through the snow-covered landscape. The cold, fresh air bites at your face and every breath you take seems to freeze in the air before disappearing. You can see your breath, a constant reminder that warmth is a fleeting luxury. You've gathered as much food as you could, dried meat, salted fish roots and tubers stored in the ground, but you know that you'll need more. Hunting during winter is far harder. The animals are fewer, more skittish and more difficult to track. Yet every piece of food you gather is vital. It's all about survival now, not abundance. Your pantry, whether it's a dugout pit or a wooden crate lined with straw, is your lifeline. In ancient times, survival during the winter months didn't just involve huddling around the fire. It was an intricate dance of preservation. Meat, for instance, was often salted, smoked or dried to ensure it would last through the months when fresh hunting was nearly impossible. Imagine standing next to a fire watching as meat is slowly smoked, the scent of burning wood and salted flesh mixing in the air. It's not just about flavour, it's about the survival of an entire community. The process is long and tedious, but it is essential for enduring the winter months. Historians still debate which preservation methods were most effective across different cultures, but all agree that it wasn't just the amount of food that mattered, it was the ability to keep it for the long haul. Scholars sometimes argue whether the first methods of food preservation were based purely on necessity, or if they were influenced by cultural rituals as well. For some early humans, food preservation wasn't just about survival, it was also about honouring the animals they hunted, ensuring that every part of the animal was used to its fullest potential. This connection to the land and the animals they hunted was deeply spiritual for many cultures. They weren't simply taking from nature, they were giving back in their own way by ensuring nothing went to waste. The salt that preserved the fish, the smoke that kept the meat, and the storage methods that ensured food wouldn't spoil became intertwined with the culture of the people. But food wasn't the only thing that needed preservation. Water, too, was a critical element in survival. In many ancient cultures, water sources would freeze during the colder months, making it difficult to access a vital resource. But the ancient ingenuity didn't stop at food. They found creative ways to store water that didn't rely on modern methods. Some would dig wells below the frost line where the ground remained unfrozen, allowing them to access fresh water even during the most frigid days. Others would store snow and ice in insulated pits, or in caves melting it when necessary. The challenge wasn't just collecting food or water, it was about ensuring that even when the world outside was frozen solid, you could still access what you needed to survive. Imagine the work that went into these storage methods. It wasn't just a matter of packing away food and water, it was a matter of foresight, of planning for a future where survival wasn't guaranteed. You knew that food would be scarce, and you knew that you would need to rely on every single piece of food you had carefully preserved. But there was also an element of hope in this preparation. The anticipation of the thaw, the return of warmth and life, was always just beyond the horizon. It was that hope that kept people going, that belief that winter, as harsh as it was, would eventually give way to spring. But what about those without the means to preserve food? What about those without a proper shelter, or those who had no family or community to rely on? Winter, in many ways, was a test of social bonds. The cold didn't discriminate, and in a world without modern medicine, exposure and malnutrition could take a toll quickly. It's easy to think of survival as an individual effort, but in these early communities it was a communal challenge. Neighbours would share what little they had, pooling resources to make sure no one went without. People would come together to hunt, to gather, to prepare for the long months ahead, each person contributing what they could, whether it was food, firewood, or simply keeping the spirits up. The struggle was not just about surviving alone, it was about the survival of the community. And in many ways it was this interconnectedness, this shared reliance on one another, that made surviving the winter possible. Interestingly, some cultures developed an entire philosophy around communal food storage and sharing. For example, the early Vikings would often hold large feasts at the beginning of winter celebrating their harvests and ensuring that everyone had enough to survive the cold months. These gatherings weren't just for eating, they were opportunities for the community to bond, to pass on knowledge, and to solidify relationships that would prove vital when the snow came. The concept of communal survival became a cornerstone of many early cultures where the well-being of the group was just as important, if not more, than the well-being of the individual. The methods of food storage and preservation were a reflection of a deeper understanding of the environment. Early humans didn't just survive the winter, they learned how to live with it to make it work to their advantage. They understood that their survival depended on their ability to adapt to the ever-changing conditions around them. And as you lie back now under the warmth of your blankets, think of the countless generations who survived without the comforts we now take for granted. Their ingenuity, their sense of community, and their deep connection to the land allowed them to make it through the toughest winters the world had to offer. As the seasons change, the harsh realities of winter begin to settle in, marking the start of a long period of endurance. With the first frost, the landscape transforms into something almost unrecognizable. What was once green, full of life, now appears as a cold, barren wasteland. The trees stand stark against the sky, their branches stripped bare of leaves. The fields are blanketed in snow and the air is crisp, biting at your skin. You know that winter is not just about surviving the cold, it's about finding ways to make use of what nature has provided, using every bit of resource at your disposal to weather the storm. The early humans who lived through these winters didn't just endure, they adapted. The same fields that provided food during the warmer months were now silent, empty, and difficult to cultivate. So how did they keep food sources alive during such a harsh time? One key survival method was the cultivation of root vegetables, a critical food source that would grow just below the surface of the frozen earth. Early humans knew that these crops could endure even the bitterest cold hidden under a layer of snow and frost. You can imagine kneeling down and carefully digging into the earth, feeling the cold soil beneath your hands, and retrieving the carrots, turnips, and other hardy vegetables their pet had been carefully planted in the fall. What's fascinating is how these early people didn't just rely on what was easily visible. They learned to work with nature's cycles, planting crops that could survive long after everything else had died off. They developed a deep understanding of the land's ability to provide even in the harshest conditions. This wasn't just a survival tactic, it was a testament to the adaptability of early cultures. Cultivating food in the winter required patience, perseverance, and an understanding that nature worked on its own timeline regardless of human needs. Interestingly, some researchers suggest that this ability to work with nature rather than against it played a key role in the development of agricultural societies. Early humans didn't just see the winter as a time of deprivation, they saw it as a time of careful planning. Scholars still debate whether early agriculture developed as a result of necessity during harsh winters, or whether it was a slow, gradual process. Either way, these early farming practices allowed humans to thrive in regions that would have otherwise been too harsh for long-term habitation. What's clear, however, is that early farmers were ahead of the curve, understanding the rhythms of the seasons and learning how to preserve food for the long haul. While agriculture played a major role in survival, there were still other factors that shaped the way early humans dealt with the cold months. One such factor was the ever-present need for animal resources. Imagine being out in the snow-covered wilderness with nothing but the tools you've made yourself to hunt and gather. Animals like the reindeer bison and wild boar were hunted not just for their meat, but for their pelts, bones, and other materials that could be used in clothing, shelter, and tools. The fur of these animals became a crucial resource for surviving the winter. In fact, animal pelts were not just practical, they were vital to survival. Without them, early humans would have been exposed to the cold in ways we can hardly imagine today. Layer after layer of animal skins were sewn together to create garments that would protect from the biting winds. What makes this even more remarkable is the skill required to turn raw pelts into clothing. Every step of the process, from skinning the animal to tanning the hide to stitching the pieces together, was done by hand. It was a labour-intensive process, but one that was absolutely necessary for survival. Scholars continue to discuss the ways in which early humans used animal products, especially in the harshest of climates. Did they rely on just one animal for all their needs? Or did they mix and match different materials to create the perfect balance of warmth and flexibility? Some researchers believe that early humans may have developed specialized methods for different types of pelts, with each species offering unique benefits. It wasn't just about clothing, it was about making the most out of what the land could provide. And while early humans had no formal education in biology or animal husbandry, their intimate connection with the land allowed them to make decisions that ensured their survival. You can imagine the satisfaction that came from using these materials for warmth. After all, every piece of clothing wasn't just a garment, it was a tool for survival. It was protection against the cold, protection against the elements. Each fur-lined cloak, each pair of leather boots was crafted with a purpose. These early humans knew that surviving winter wasn't just about finding food. It was about using everything at their disposal to stay alive. In these early times, the relationship between humans and the land was not one of conquest, but one of coexistence. Early humans understood that to survive the winter, they had to work with the environment rather than fighting against it. They learned to use every resource available to them, from the plants they grew to the animals they hunted, and in doing so they were able to create sustainable ways of life in places that would otherwise be inhospitable. It wasn't just about survival, it was about thriving in a world that seemed bent on pushing them to the brink. As you relax in the comfort of your modern home, it's easy to forget how much effort, how much knowledge went into each aspect of survival. You take for granted the luxury of having heat, food and water at your fingertips. But in the world of early humans, each day was a new challenge, a new opportunity to work with the land to adapt and grow. And it was that adaptability, that deep connection to nature that allowed them to survive even the harshest winters. The fire continues to crackle in the background, casting long shadows against the walls of your shelter. And you can't help but think about the one thing that makes life during these bitter winters bearable: community. It wasn't just the fire, the food, or even the clothing that ensured survival during the cold months. It was the human connection, the way people came together and shared what little they had. In the world you're imagining, with the cold pressing in from every side, every small gesture of warmth, whether it be physical or emotional, was as crucial as anything else. You can picture it now, families huddled close around the fire, each person contributing what they could to the communal effort. Food was shared, firewood was gathered, and stories were exchanged, not just to pass the time but to keep the spirit alive during the long, dark nights. Historians often debate the role of community in early human survival. Was it strictly the need to endure together that brought people closer? Or was there something more profound about the way early humans organized themselves in the face of hardship? Some believe that social bonds were primarily formed out of necessity, the need to survive and protect each other from the harsh winter. Others suggest that these bonds were more instinctual, deeply ingrained in human nature. Perhaps the cold, the isolation, and the struggle to survive in such harsh conditions forced people to rely on each other in ways we often take for granted today. What's interesting is that communal living wasn't just a survival strategy, it was also a social contract. People worked together not only for warmth and food, but to maintain a sense of stability and normalcy. With the cold making everything harder, there had to be a sense of order, a structure that allowed everyone to know their role. You can imagine a small community, the entire group coming together to share in the labour of survival. The elderly might have kept watch over the fire while the young worked outside to gather firewood or hunt for food. The strength of the community depended on the cooperation of each individual, and in these times of hardship, the bonds forged through shared effort became stronger than ever before. In these early societies, the concept of home was more than just a shelter. It was a space defined by its social function. It was where survival took place, where people gathered, where memories were made and where everyone knew their place. A house wasn't just a physical structure. It was a social institution that brought people together to keep the worst of the cold at bay. Everyone shared the same space, and in return the warmth of human connection became as necessary as the warmth of the fire. It's remarkable when you think about it. Even in the harshest conditions, people found ways to build something lasting out of necessity. They created not only a home, but a sanctuary where the spirit could thrive, even when the body struggled. There's an element of resilience here that's easy to overlook. Today we have a tendency to think of resilience as something individual, something tied to personal strength. But in these early times, resilience wasn't just about a single person's ability to endure it. It was about the strength of the group. It was about finding ways to survive together, learning from each other and sharing in the effort to make it through. The cold, the scarcity of food, the constant threat of death, none of these were easy challenges. But when people worked together, when they shared their resources and their knowledge, survival became not only possible but likely. One of the most fascinating things about these early communities was how the harshness of the environment shaped their social structures. The need for cooperation during the coldest months of the year forced early humans to develop strong social bonds. These bonds weren't just for warmth, they were about survival security and maintaining a sense of hope in a world that could seem overwhelmingly bleak. Imagine that feeling of knowing that everyone around you, despite the cold and the fear, was there to help. The challenges may have been great, but so was the strength that came from unity. On top of everything else, these early communities were also marked by the ways in which people engaged with their surroundings during winter. Early humans knew that the winter didn't just need to be survived, they needed to find ways to thrive in it, to take advantage of the resources they had. This included everything from understanding the behavior of animals to knowing how to use the terrain to their advantage. For example, early people learned how to navigate through the snow, using tools and techniques passed down through generations. Walking through deep snow was no easy task, yet early humans developed their own kind of snowshoes and other methods to make it easier to travel, gather and hunt. This skillful adaptation to the environment was not just a matter of survival. It was a testament to early humans' deep understanding of their surroundings. Each season, with its own rhythm and demands, was an opportunity for them to refine their techniques, whether it was using the land for food, for shelter, or for navigation. These were not just learned skills. They were woven into the fabric of early life, taught through experience and passed down to the next generation. Scholars continue to discuss the role of these environmental adaptations in shaping early societies. Were these survival skills passed down in structured ways, or were they learned informally through trial and error? Some experts believe that survival strategies were learned primarily through personal experience, while others argue that communities likely had formalized systems for passing down knowledge. Regardless of the method, what is clear is that these environmental strategies were integral to winter survival. The land was both a challenge and a resource, and early humans learned how to coexist with it. As you relax, imagining yourself in this ancient world, it's easy to feel a sense of awe at the ingenuity that allowed early humans to not only survive, but to create thriving communities in the most difficult conditions. Today we often take our comforts for granted, but it wasn't always this way. In the past, survival was never certain, but it was possible because of human connection, adaptation and resilience. So as you settle in for the night, remember the communities that lived through winters, without the luxury of modern technology, and how they used what they had of fire, food, clothing and each other to face the cold and come out on the other side. As the days shorten and the nights grow longer, the cold takes on a new meaning. You are no longer simply surviving winter. You are living within its grasp. Outside, the land is covered in a blanket of snow stretching out in every direction. The once vibrant earth is now a white frozen expanse, and the world seems quieter, almost as if it's been muted by the chill. You can feel the isolation creeping in the deep silence that settles over the landscape, broken only by the occasional gust of wind or the distant call of an animal. This is the harsh reality of winter in the ancient world. but despite the isolation, people knew how to live through it. The key to survival wasn't just about enduring the cold, it was about understanding the rhythm of the seasons and the subtle shifts that mark the passage of time. Early humans didn't have the luxury of modern calendars or clocks. They had only the changing sky, the movement of the sun, and the shifts in the weather to mark the passing of days. The winter solstice, the longest night of the year, held particular significance. It was a time to reflect, a time to hope for the return of the sun and warmth. Imagine standing outside under a sky so clear that the stars seem to shine brighter than ever, feeling the bitter cold that pierces through your clothes and chills you to the bone. Yet in that moment there's a sense of quiet determination, a belief that despite the freezing temperatures and the long dark nights, the world will turn. The sun will return. In ancient times, this transition from winter to spring was not just a change in weather, it was an event that held both practical and spiritual importance. For many cultures, the solstice marked the end of the darkest days and the beginning of the slow return of light. It was a time of renewal, a time when the earth, though still frozen, began to stir. People believed that the solstice held power, a magical moment when the forces of nature shifted and the promise of spring was just beyond the horizon. Interestingly, many early cultures celebrated this time of year with festivals, rituals, and ceremonies that were meant to honour the sun, the earth, and the changing seasons. Some of these celebrations involved feasting, music, and dance, a way to lift spirits and strengthen community bonds during the darkest months of the year. In some traditions, fire was used in these celebrations, symbolising the return of warmth and light. The hearth, which had kept people alive through the cold months, was now celebrated as the heart of the home, the centre around which families and communities gathered. In these moments, the fire wasn't just a necessity, it was a symbol of hope, a beacon in the darkness. Historians have long debated the exact origins of these winter solstice celebrations, with some arguing that they were part of ancient agricultural traditions, while others suggest they were more rooted in spiritual beliefs about the natural world. What we do know, however, is that these early rituals helped people cope with the isolation and hardship of winter. They provided a sense of meaning during a time when the cold seemed unending. The rituals served as a reminder that the earth was still alive, that the cycle of seasons was continuing, and that despite the harshness of winter, spring would eventually come. The rituals surrounding the solstice also held practical significance. They were times of feasting and replenishment, a way to celebrate the food stores that had been preserved during the colder months. Early humans didn't have supermarkets or modern refrigeration, so food was carefully preserved throughout the year. Meat was salted, dried or smoked, vegetables were stored in cellars or buried in the ground, and grains were kept in secure containers. These stores of food were not only essential for survival, they were also a cause for celebration. The solstice festivals marked a time to enjoy the bounty that had been carefully prepared over the previous months. They were a moment to come together as a community to share in the warmth of the fire and the food that had kept everyone alive. The communal nature of these celebrations was vital. The cold of winter could drive people into isolation, but the solstice brought them back together. It was a time to gather, to share stories, to bond over the shared experience of surviving the winter months. For early communities, these gatherings were not just about survival, they were about maintaining a sense of unity, a sense of hope that would carry them through until the first signs of spring appeared. The bonds forged during these long cold months were stronger than ever, and they would last through the warmer months as well, creating a foundation for the year to come. In a way, the solstice was a moment of reflection. The darkness of winter provided the perfect backdrop for looking inward, for thinking about the hardships endured and the strength it took to survive. It was a time to be grateful for the warmth of the fire, for the food that had been preserved, and for the community that had supported you through it all. It wasn't just about surviving the winter. It was about finding meaning in the struggle, about seeing the long dark nights as part of a larger cycle that would eventually bring light and warmth. Scholars still debate whether the winter solstice celebrations were a universal practice across early cultures or if they were unique to certain regions. Some argue that these celebrations were a response to the challenges of living in northern climates, where the cold and darkness were especially harsh. Others believe that they were a more universal human experience, a way to mark the passage of time and to celebrate the resilience of the human spirit. Regardless of their origins, one thing is clear. These rituals were a vital part of life in the ancient world, a way to connect with the natural world, with each other, and with the promise of warmer days ahead. As you lie there wrapped in warmth, it's easy to forget just how difficult it would have been to survive without the comforts we take for granted today. The cold would have been constant, unrelenting, and yet early humans managed to find hope, find connection, and ultimately find ways to survive. They may have lacked the modern conveniences we enjoy, but they had something far more powerful, a deep understanding of their environment, a strong sense of community, and the unshakable belief that no winter lasts forever. And in this belief, in this shared resilience, they found the strength to endure and to thrive. As you sit by the fire, its warmth curling around you like a comforting embrace. It's hard to imagine that such warmth was once a rare commodity, a fragile luxury that people in ancient times would have fought to preserve. The cold of winter didn't just freeze the land, it froze everything. The world outside your shelter was a frozen wilderness, and survival in that world required more than just physical endurance. It required resourcefulness, innovation, and an intimate understanding of the environment. To survive in the winter, early humans had to master their surroundings, learning how to navigate the land and how to find warmth when the world seemed to be covered in ice. It's easy to overlook the incredible adaptability of early humans. In our modern world, we take for granted the ability to warm up in minutes after stepping out into the cold. We flick a switch, turn a dial, or adjust a thermostat. But in the past, there was no such thing as quick warmth. Every bit of heat had to be carefully managed and maintained, which meant that even the act of keeping warm was a strategic communal effort. Early shelters, though simple in design, were built with the sole purpose of trapping and conserving warmth. It wasn't just about creating a roof over your head, it was about building a space that could provide the refuge you needed to survive the long bitter cold. You might find it surprising, but many early homes weren't built with solid walls or roofs. Instead, early humans often constructed homes that were partially underground or built with materials that offered insulation like earth leaves or animal hides. These homes were designed not just to protect from the cold, but to trap the heat that could be generated from a single fire. Picture yourself in one of these shelters, surrounded by the soft, muted light of the fire and the smell of smoke in the air. You can hear the wind howling outside, but inside there is warmth, a precious, fleeting warmth. This was a constant balancing act. You had to carefully stoke the fire, make sure the smoke didn't overwhelm you, and ensure that the heat remained long enough to carry you through the night. Scholars still debate how early humans came to master the construction of such efficient shelters. Some believe that these methods were passed down from generation to generation through trial and error, while others argue that knowledge about shelter building was more formalized, learned from expert builders or spiritual guides. Regardless of how the knowledge was passed, what is clear is that these homes became life-saving refuges in a world that could easily have swallowed those who were unprepared. What makes these shelters even more fascinating is that they weren't just places to stay warm. They were places where people came together to form strong social bonds, where communities were created and strengthened. Survival wasn't just about individual effort, it was about the collective strength of those around you. In these early shelters, warmth wasn't just physical, it was emotional and social as well. You were not only protected from the cold outside, but from the isolation and loneliness that often accompany it. Together, people huddled around the fire, sharing stories, food and laughter, finding comfort and strength in one another's company. Interestingly, these early shelters were also places of rest and healing. While modern homes are equipped with medicine cabinets and first aid kits, early humans relied on the knowledge of plants, herbs, and natural remedies to nurse wounds, combat illness, and soothe ailments caused by the cold. Many ancient cultures knew how to make use of what the land offered. From soothing teas made from dried herbs to poultices made from plants that could ease the pain of frostbite, early humans developed an understanding of how to heal their bodies with the natural world around them. This knowledge wasn't just practical, it was a deep connection to the earth and its cycles. People knew that surviving winter wasn't just about physical protection, it was about understanding the land and using its resources wisely. There were no hospitals, no pharmacies, and no modern medicine. There was only the knowledge passed down through generations. Historians still question whether this knowledge was universally shared across different cultures or whether specific healing traditions developed independently in different regions. Some believe that the shared struggles of winter survival led to common healing methods, while others suggest that each culture developed its own unique approaches based on the plants and resources available to them. One of the most interesting aspects of these early healing practices is how they became deeply intertwined with spiritual beliefs. In many cultures, healing wasn't just about curing physical ailments, it was about restoring balance between the body, mind, and spirit. The winter months, with their isolation and hardships, often made people vulnerable not only to physical cold, but also to emotional strain. It was during these dark, cold months that early humans sought comfort in rituals, prayer, and spiritual practices to maintain their well-being. The winter months became not just a time of survival, but a time for reflection, a time to seek strength and guidance from higher powers. For many ancient cultures, winter was a time to honor the cycles of life and death, a reminder that even the harshest seasons would eventually end. There was always the understanding that spring would come, that the earth would thaw, and life would return. This cyclical understanding of life was central to many spiritual practices. The winter solstice, for example, wasn't just the longest night of the year, it was also a celebration of the sun's return. People held festivals, feasts, and rituals to mark this moment, to honor the promise that life would continue, that the cold would give way to warmth and light. As you sit by your modern fire, comfortable and warm, it's easy to forget just how much effort it took for early humans to survive the same cold. The warmth you feel now is effortless, a luxury born of centuries of adaptation and innovation. Yet it wasn't always this way. In the past, each fire was a victory, each shelter a triumph of human ingenuity. Early humans didn't have the comforts of modern life, but they had something far more powerful, a deep connection to the land, the ability to adapt, and the strength to endure. They made it through the cold because they understood their environment, because they worked together, and because they believed that despite the darkness, the warmth would eventually return. As the months pass and the bitter winds begin to subside, there's a palpable shift in the air. The days stretch out longer. The first rays of sunlight creeping back over the horizon. Spring is approaching, but before the thaw, the final stretch of winter still demands respect. In this moment, you stand at the crossroads between two worlds, the harsh, frozen reality of winter and the hopeful renewal of spring. The land that was once a lifeless white expanse is now beginning to stir. Small signs of life begin to emerge from beneath the snow. A bud appears on a tree branch. The frozen earth begins to crack, allowing the first brave shoots of green to pierce through the ice. The promise of warmer days is just around the corner, but winter still holds its grip. For those who lived through these ancient winters, the transition wasn't just a physical shift, it was also deeply spiritual. The seasons governed their lives in ways we often overlook today. The ebb and flow of nature's cycles were far more than mere markers of time. They were a direct reflection of the forces that controlled their world. To the early human, the change from winter to spring wasn't just about the temperature warming up. It was a symbol of renewal, a reminder that the darkness would always be followed by light. This cyclical understanding of life, the balance between light and dark, life and death, was a fundamental part of their worldview. Historians have long wondered about the role of these seasonal transitions in the development of early rituals and beliefs. Some believe that many ancient spiritual practices were tied directly to the cycles of nature, with the solstices, equinoxes, and the return of spring becoming important milestones in human culture. Early humans didn't just live through the seasons, they celebrated them. Winter, with its long dark nights, was a time of reflection and preparation. The return of spring, with its warmth and growth, was a time of hope, renewal, and gratitude. It was a time when life began anew. One of the more fascinating aspects of early spring rituals is how they often involved a deep connection to the earth's fertility. Early peoples believed that the earth itself, much like them, went through cycles of change and renewal. As the land thawed, it was seen as a kind of awakening, a rebirth that mirrored their own survival. Many cultures celebrated this time, with festivals honouring both the earth and the forces that sustain them. Imagine standing in the softening earth surrounded by the first flowers and the scent of the fresh soil as people come together to give thanks for the return of life. It's during this time of transition that the agricultural cycle truly begins. The cold of winter may have driven people to huddle together for warmth, but the arrival of spring brought with it the promise of new life. It was time to plant, to prepare the soil for the crops that would sustain the community through the coming year. The connection between humans and the land became even more intimate during the planting season. The earth wasn't just a backdrop for survival, it was a partner in the struggle to live. Early humans learned to read the signs of the earth, when to plant, when to harvest, and when to rest. It was a relationship built on mutual respect, with humans understanding that their survival depended on the health of the land. Interestingly, the arrival of spring didn't just mark the end of the harsh season, it also signified a shift in the rhythms of daily life. Winter had been a time of scarcity when food was carefully rationed and every bit of energy was spent ensuring survival. But with the warming weather came the promise of abundance. Food would once again be plentiful, the soil fertile and the animals abundant. It was a time to celebrate, to feast, and to rejoice in the fruits of one's labour. The rituals that had begun with the first fire in winter continued, but now they focused on the earth's renewal. Scholars still debate the origins of these spring rituals. Were they born from practical necessity, a way to ensure a good harvest, or were they more symbolic, connected to the human need to understand and control the natural world? Some argue that these rituals were rooted in the agricultural calendar, marking the most important moments in the growing season. Others suggest that they were spiritual in nature, designed to honour the gods or spirits that govern the cycles of life and death. Whatever the true origins, what is clear is that early humans saw their survival as inseparable from the rhythms of nature. Their lives were not just shaped by the changing seasons, they were deeply intertwined with them. As the last remnants of snow melt and the earth slowly thaws, you can imagine the sense of relief that comes with the arrival of spring. The freezing grip of winter is finally loosening, and the warmth of the sun begins to feel like a blessing. But even as the temperature rises, there's a lingering sense of respect for the cold months that have passed. Winter was a teacher, a force that demanded resilience and strength. And while the coming warmth is a welcome change, there's also a deep appreciation for the lessons that winter has imparted. It was in the struggle against the cold that communities were forged, and it was in the darkness of winter that the foundations of survival were laid. For early humans, the arrival of spring was a reminder of their strength, their resilience, and their ability to adapt. It was a time to look back at the challenges they had faced and to look forward to the opportunities that the warmer months would bring. The harsh winters were a test of their endurance, but the arrival of spring was a celebration of life itself, a testament to the human spirit's ability to survive, to thrive, and to find hope in even the darkest of times. As you lie in the comfort of your warm home, it's easy to forget the struggle of those who lived through the winters of the past. Yet their resilience is something we carry with us today. The lessons learned during those long cold months continue to shape our understanding of survival of community and of the deep connection between humanity and the natural world. In this way, the spirit of those ancient winters lives on, reminding us that no matter how harsh the season renewal is always possible, the days continue to grow longer as the gentle warmth of spring spreads across the land. The air feels different now, lighter, carrying the scent of fresh earth and new growth. The snow that once covered the ground is slowly retreating, revealing the green shoots of plants that are eager to push through the soil. The birds that had long ago fled are returning their songs, filling the air. Life is returning to the world, and with it comes a sense of renewal of hope. As the seasons shift, you realize that winter, though difficult and isolating, has shaped the very way people lived. Now, as spring takes over, the story of survival continues, but this time it's the celebration of growth and prosperity. For early humans, spring wasn't just a season, it was a time of transformation, a moment when the earth shifted from a state of dormancy to one of fertility. The frozen soil, which had been so unyielding during the winter months, now softened, welcoming the first seeds that would sprout into life. Early peoples understood this cycle intimately. They didn't just wait for the warmth to return, they actively participated in it. With their crops planted and their shelters rebuilt after the long months of cold, the sense of anticipation was palpable. The success of the coming months rested not only on the weather, but on their hard work and careful planning. In the past, the planting season wasn't just about sowing seeds, it was about cultivating hope. The earth, which had been covered in frost, now offered sustenance, providing the possibility of a fruitful year. Farmers and gatherers would work together, preparing the land, planting seeds, and tending to the crops. They didn't have the modern tools or knowledge that we do today, yet their understanding of the land of timing and patience was profound. They knew when to plant, when to water, and when to let the land rest. It was an intimate relationship with the earth, one that demanded respect and care. What's remarkable is that this deep connection to the land wasn't just practical, it was spiritual as well. Early humans didn't view the earth as a passive entity that simply provided food. They saw it as a partner, a living, breathing part of their survival. Many ancient cultures believed that the earth's fertility was a gift from the gods, and in return they offered rituals and prayers to honor that gift. The spring planting season was a time of renewal not only for the land but for the spirit. People would gather around the fields offering thanks and asking for blessings, ensuring that the crops would grow strong and abundant. This spiritual connection to the land gave the early peoples a sense of purpose and hope, a belief that they were part of something larger than themselves, something that transcended the struggle for survival. Interestingly, many ancient cultures celebrated the arrival of spring with festivals and feasts that marked the rebirth of life. These celebrations weren't just for enjoyment, they were vital for the morale of the community. After months of isolation and hardship, these gatherings provided a much-needed opportunity to come together, to share in the joy of the season, and to reinforce the bonds that held the community together. Feasts were a time to celebrate the first fruits of the season, to enjoy the food that had been carefully preserved throughout the winter months, and to recognize the hard work that had brought the community through the cold. It was a time to recognize that survival was not just about the individual, but about the collective strength of the group. Historians often debate the role of these festivals in early cultures, questioning whether they were purely practical celebrations of the harvest, or if they had deeper, more symbolic meanings. Some argue that these festivals were tied to agricultural cycles marking the beginning of planting the harvest or other critical moments in the farming calendar. Others suggest that they were more about the community itself, the shared rituals that reinforced social bonds and created a sense of unity. Regardless of the precise origins, what is clear is that these celebrations played a crucial role in early human life. They weren't just about food and festivity. They were a way of honouring the land, of recognising the cycles of nature, and of recharging the spirit after the long isolating winter months. The changing seasons also had a profound effect on early human psychology. While winter was a time of survival, spring represented hope, growth, and the possibility of abundance. The transition from the cold, dark months to the warmer, brighter days was a reminder that even the harshest times would eventually pass. For early peoples, this wasn't just a hopeful thought, it was a practical reality. The winter with its deep isolation and fierce cold was followed by spring, which brought with it the renewal of life. This cycle of renewal wasn't just something they experienced, it was something they deeply believed in. It was this belief, this understanding of the rhythms of nature that allowed them to persevere in a world that often seemed indifferent to their survival. As you lie back, wrapped in the comfort of modern warmth, it's hard to imagine just how significant these shifts in the seasons were for early humans. Today, the arrival of spring might mean a change in wardrobe or a shift in outdoor activities, but for early peoples it was a fundamental change in the very fabric of their lives. It wasn't just about surviving the winter. It was about making it through to the other side where life would begin anew. The long months of cold, the struggle for food, and the constant battle against the elements were all part of the larger cycle of life, a cycle that always ended with the rebirth of the earth. And this renewal wasn't just about crops. It was about the renewal of hope, of community and of the human spirit. In many ways, the challenges of winter, the hardships that came with it, were what made the arrival of spring so much more meaningful. The warmth of the sun, the green of the grass, the hum of life returning to the earth. These weren't just physical changes. They were symbols of the endurance of the human spirit, a reminder that no matter how harsh the winter, the spring would always come. The cycles of nature were and still are an inherent part of the human experience. The challenges we face today may be different, but the lessons of survival, adaptation and renewal remain as relevant as ever. The land around you is starting to come alive. The first flowers are peeking through the softening earth and the scent of fresh grass fills the air. The world, once quiet and still under a blanket of snow, now seems to hum with life. You can feel the change in the air as the temperatures rise, and you know that the long winter has finally released its grip. The harsh cold is fading, replaced by the warmth of the sun that begins to stretch its rays across the landscape. In this moment, you are reminded of how cyclical life truly is. What was once frozen is now fertile. The harshest of seasons gives way to growth, transformation and renewal. It is a time to look forward to what's to come, but also a time to reflect on everything you've endured to reach this point. Early humans were keenly aware of this cycle. As the earth began to thaw, they saw it as both a literal and symbolic event. The change in the land wasn't just a change in temperature, it was a transition that marked the end of one phase and the beginning of another. It was a time for renewal, for new beginnings. For the early human, every season was marked by a purpose, with spring symbolizing not only the return of warmth, but also a new chapter in the struggle to survive. With the thaw came the promise of growth of plants sprouting from the earth and animals returning to their familiar patterns. There was a sense of optimism that came with the changing season, but also an understanding of how fragile that optimism could be. For ancient agricultural societies, spring was the most crucial time of year. It wasn't just about planting crops, it was about preparing for a future of abundance or scarcity. Every seed planted in the ground was a decision that would determine whether the community would thrive or struggle for survival in the coming months. This time of planting wasn't just about food, it was about hope. It was the culmination of everything that had been prepared during the cold months. Early humans didn't simply plant seeds and wait. They worked in tandem with the earth, watching for signs of growth, adjusting their methods to suit the changing environment. They were deeply connected to the rhythms of nature, and every change in the seasons became a part of their collective understanding of life. You can almost hear the hum of activity that accompanies this seasonal change, the planting, the tending of crops, the careful preparation for what is to come. While winter had been a time of survival, of conserving resources and staying warm, spring was a time of action. This was when people came together working not only for their own survival, but for the survival of the community. There was a sense of urgency to the work after all the future depended on it. A late frost or a poorly timed planting could mean disaster. For early humans, success was not just about the immediate present, it was about planning for the future, ensuring that they would have enough to sustain them when the cold months returned. What makes this even more fascinating is how early humans relied on the land to shape their rituals, their spiritual beliefs, and even their social structures. The cycles of nature weren't just something to be understood, they were something to be respected, even revered. Many ancient cultures believed that their survival was tied to the blessings of the earth. Spring, with its promise of new life, was seen as a sacred time, one when humans could offer thanks for the fertility of the land and the promise of a fruitful harvest. It was a time of renewal, a time to give back to the earth what had been taken, to honour the forces of nature that sustained them. The earth was not just a backdrop for survival, it was a partner in the struggle. Scholars continue to explore the ways in which early humans viewed their connection to nature. Did they see the seasons as a reflection of divine forces, or were they simply practical markers for survival? Some researchers argue that the ancient belief in the cyclical nature of life was rooted in a deep spiritual connection to the earth, with spring representing both a literal and symbolic rebirth. Others believe that these seasonal transitions were more pragmatic, a way to organise the year and ensure that communities could plan for the coming months. Regardless of the origins of these beliefs, what is clear is that early humans didn't just live with the seasons they lived through, them guided by the rhythm of the earth. This deep connection to nature wasn't just about survival, it was about finding meaning in the struggle. Every crop planted, every animal hunted, every ritual performed was a reflection of the community's understanding of the cycles that govern their lives. Spring, as the harbinger of life, was a time for celebration, but it was also a time to acknowledge the delicate balance between human effort and the forces of nature. Early societies understood that survival wasn't guaranteed. The earth could be harsh, unforgiving, and unpredictable. But they also understood that the seasons were a constant, a reminder that life was cyclical, and that even in the harshest of winters, the warmth of spring would eventually return. Interestingly, these early rituals surrounding spring were not just about the land, they were about the people too. As communities gathered to plant crops and prepare for the coming year, they also came together to renew their social bonds. After months of isolation and the struggles of winter-spring, was a time to reconnect, to share in the fruits of their labour, and to strengthen the relationships that held their societies together. These rituals often involved feasts, dances and celebrations, all designed to mark the transition from hardship to hope. The arrival of spring was not just a practical necessity, it was a cultural event, one that reinforced the very foundations of society. As you reflect on these early spring traditions, think about how different life must have been in the past. The arrival of spring was not just a change in the weather, it was a life or death event, a moment when survival could be ensured or jeopardized. In the world of early humans, there was no guarantee that the thaw would come, no certainty that the crops would grow or the animals would return. Yet through careful planning, hard work, and an unshakable belief in the cycles of nature, they survived. They didn't just endure the seasons, they embraced them, finding meaning in the changes that mark the passage of time. And so as you sit comfortably in the warmth of modern life, remember the resilience of those who lived through winters without the conveniences we now enjoy. Their connection to the land, their understanding of the seasons, and their ability to adapt ensured that they not only survived but thrived. Spring for them was more than just a season. It was a symbol of hope, of perseverance, and of the promise that no matter how harsh the winter, the warmth would eventually return. As the days continue to lengthen and the earth begins to warm, the landscape around you shifts. What was once a quiet, frozen world is now teeming with life. You can feel the pulse of the land in the growing warmth, in the birds returning to the sky, in the rustle of new leaves on the trees. The sound of running water becomes more frequent as rivers and streams once blocked by ice begin to flow again. It's a season of renewal, a time when the earth stretches and yawns after a long winter's sleep, ready to embrace the full cycle of life once more. But even as the warmth returns, it's a reminder that survival is never certain. The seasons may change, but every year brings new challenges, new risks to navigate. For the early humans who lived through these seasons, spring wasn't just a time of physical change, it was a time of mental and emotional renewal as well. The long months of winter had been marked by scarcity and hardship, but with the thaw came the hope that life would return, that the earth would once again offer up its bounty. This was a time when communities began to breathe again, when the days of huddling together for warmth were replaced by the hope of a prosperous year ahead. The thaw wasn't just about food, it was about everything that came with it. The return of social gatherings, the breaking of isolation, the chance to reconnect with the world around you. What's striking about this transition is how the arrival of spring was also a time of communal effort. It wasn't just the land that was awakening, it was the people too. As the soil softened and the temperatures rose, communities gathered together to prepare the land for the planting season. The work was hard, but it was a shared effort, one that required everyone to contribute in order to ensure the survival of the group. You could imagine the activity now, families working together in the fields, sowing seeds, repairing tools, organizing food stores and readying their shelters for the busier months ahead. The sense of collective responsibility was key to surviving the year. Historians still debate the social structure of early communities. How did the dynamics of these groups shape the survival strategies they developed? Was it the collective effort that made communities so resilient, or did individual leaders emerge to guide the work? Some scholars argue that these early groups were strictly egalitarian, where everyone shared in the effort equally. Others suggest that leadership and specialization developed early on, with some members of the group taking on roles of responsibility for the sake of efficiency. But one thing is clear, survival in such harsh conditions required an immense amount of cooperation, whether it was led by one person or shared among many. The process of preparing for the growing season wasn't only about farming or food, it was a time to prepare the community itself. In many early cultures, the changing of the seasons was an opportunity to renew relationships, to reconnect with others after months of isolation. Winter had kept people apart, with the long dark nights spent huddling in shelters and the cold pushing people into smaller, more private spaces. But now, with the arrival of warmer days, people came back together. Festivals, feasts, and gatherings marked the change of season. These weren't just celebrations of the Earth's return to life, they were also ways to reaffirm social bonds, to remind the community of its strength, its unity, and its shared purpose. Interestingly, many ancient cultures viewed the spring as not only a time for planting crops, but also as a time for spiritual renewal. Just as the land needed to be prepared for the new season, so too did the community. Rituals, offerings, and ceremonies marked the arrival of spring, celebrating the earth's fertility and the gods or spirits who govern the natural world. These celebrations were deeply rooted in the belief that humans were not separate from nature but were an integral part of it. The land's cycles were seen as interconnected with the cycles of human life, with the rhythms of nature governing everything from birth to death, from planting to harvest. In this way, the arrival of spring wasn't just about physical change, it was about a spiritual rebirth. As you think about these early traditions, it's interesting to consider how they shaped the cultures that emerged from such challenging conditions. The hardships of winter, the struggle for survival, and the collective effort to plant and grow food became the foundation for rituals and stories that connected people to the land, to each other, and to their understanding of the universe. The changing of the seasons was a time to reflect on the past, to give thanks for the lessons learned, and to look forward to the future with hope and anticipation. Scholars still debate the role of these spiritual beliefs in early societies. Were they purely practical, helping people to stay focused on survival, or did they serve a deeper psychological and emotional purpose, providing a sense of comfort and meaning in the face of hardship? Some believe that these rituals were directly tied to the agricultural calendar, ensuring the proper growth of crops and the health of the land. Others suggest that they were more about community cohesion, helping people to make sense of the challenges they faced and to find comfort in shared traditions. Whatever their exact origins, these practices were integral to early human life. They were not simply about surviving the seasons, they were about thriving within them, finding meaning in the cycles of nature that governed all life. As you relax, thinking of the past, consider the stark contrast between your modern world and the one experienced by early humans. You take for granted the conveniences of technology and the comfort of modern life. Yet in the world of early humans, survival required everything: attention to the land, to the seasons, and to each other. The challenges they faced were real, but so was their determination. They not only endured harsh winters, they found ways to connect with the earth, with their communities, and with the seasons themselves. And in doing so, they created a bond to the land that would last for generations to come. The shift from winter's icy grip to the more temperate air of spring is more than just a change in weather. It is a transformation that brings with it both practical and emotional challenges, not just for the land, but for the people who call it home. The snow begins to melt and the ground softens, giving way to the possibility of new life. For early humans, this was not just a transition, it was a season of hard work and anticipation. The months of scarcity and isolation are now behind them, but they must now prepare for the months of abundance to come, knowing that success during this time would determine the prosperity of the entire community. As the soil begins to warm, the first planting of the season begins. The effort is exhausting, but it's necessary. There's a sense of urgency that permeates the air as families and entire communities gather in the fields. Together they work the land, planting seeds with the hope that these small acts will yield enough food to sustain them through the coming months. You can almost feel the excitement in the air. The soil is being tilled, seeds are being planted, and there's a collective sense of anticipation for the harvest. This is no longer about mere survival. This is about abundance, about securing the future of the group. It's a time when every hand is needed, and the strength of the community becomes more evident than ever. In early times, survival wasn't just about the individual. The land, the seasons, and the collective efforts of a community determined how well everyone would fare. When the frost finally melts away, the land must be worked with, and each person in the community plays their part. From the youngest children to the oldest elders, every individual contributes to the task of sowing the seeds for future crops. Early communities worked in unison, each person contributing their unique skills and labour, knowing that the whole group would benefit from the success or failure of the planting season. It's striking to think that such an essential process of life was in a way a performance of trust and shared responsibility. People would gather in groups not only to work, but to ensure that no one was left behind in their efforts. The young might have carried tools, the elderly might have offered their wisdom, and the middle-aged would be the ones to break up the soil and plant. It's hard to imagine the level of unity that would have been necessary to make it through such demanding work. But in this shared labour, the group found its strength. In addition to the work itself, there were other rituals that accompanied the planting season. Early humans often saw this time not only as a practical necessity, but also as a time for spiritual renewal. Many cultures associated planting with rebirth and fertility, believing that the Earth's own cycles mirrored human life. Some ancient cultures celebrated the planting season with offerings to deities, believing that the success of their crops depended on the favour of the gods. They would often pray for abundant rain, good weather, and a plentiful harvest. These rituals were not just about appeasing higher powers, they were about ensuring that their relationship with the earth remained strong, that the cycles of nature were respected and honoured. Scholars have long explored the role of spiritual beliefs in early agricultural practices. Was the planting season simply a time of hard labour and anticipation, or was it also a spiritual experience tied to a belief in divine forces? Some scholars suggest that the rituals associated with planting were closely tied to the community's understanding of the land's fertility, with spiritual practices serving as a way to ensure a successful harvest. Others argue that these beliefs were more symbolic, tied to the human need to understand and control the natural world. Whatever the case, the rituals around planting were a reflection of how deeply interconnected early humans were with the land. For them, the earth wasn't something to conquer, it was something to live in harmony with. The transition from the barren, cold winter to the hopeful planting season also marked a shift in the psychological and emotional landscape of early humans. Winter had been a time of huddling together in small shelters, of keeping the warmth of the fire as close as possible, of surviving. But with spring came new possibilities. It wasn't just about surviving anymore, it was about thriving. Early humans no longer had to focus solely on protecting themselves from the cold. They now had the chance to turn their attention to the future, to growth and progress. The planting season was a time of renewal in both a literal and figurative sense. It represented not only the rebirth of nature, but also the renewal of hope. Interestingly, some cultures marked the transition to spring with ceremonies that weren't just about planting, they were about celebrating life and the changing of the seasons. These celebrations, often held around the time of the first planting, would include feasts, dances and songs. People would come together not just to work the land, but to celebrate their shared efforts and the collective future the Kisei were one building. These communal events were not only about fun, they were about strengthening the bonds that held communities together, bonds that would be necessary as they faced the challenges of the coming year. For early societies, survival wasn't just about physical endurance. It was about maintaining social and cultural cohesion, about working together to ensure that no one was left behind. The planting season, though physically demanding, was also a time for people to come together, to share their hopes, and to create a shared vision for the future. It was a time of strength, unity and renewal, where the work of the land wasn't just about securing food, it was about strengthening the very fabric of society. As you think about the ancient world and the challenges early humans faced, it's easy to forget just how much they accomplished with so little. Today we have access to modern technology, to convenience and to comfort. But in the ancient world, the act of planting seeds was an act of hope, a commitment to a future that wasn't guaranteed. Early humans didn't just plant crops, they planted the foundation for the societies that would come after them. And as the warm days of spring begin to settle in, you can feel the optimism that spread across the land, knowing that they were not just surviving, they were creating a future. As spring continues to unfold, there's a profound shift in the atmosphere around you. The once frozen world, which seemed so inhospitable during the depths of winter, now hums with life. The soil once hardened under layers of ice and snow is softening, releasing its latent energy. Plants begin to rise from the earth, stretching towards the sun, eager to participate in the cycle of growth that will sustain both nature and humans through the warmer months. Early humans could feel this shift too, and it was one that carried with it both practical importance and spiritual significance. The thaw wasn't just about the earth becoming fertile again, it was about the renewal of hope, the belief that the trials of winter had a purpose and that the arrival of spring was the reward for endurance. There's something deeply symbolic about this transformation. Winter had been a time of preservation, of holding on, of managing resources, and protecting the fragile warmth that allowed life to persist. The arrival of spring, however, brought with it the need for action. It was a season of sowing, of planting the seeds that would yield crops, of working the land with the knowledge that survival wasn't guaranteed, but that everything depended on these next few months of hard work. The work didn't stop with the thaw. It was a busy time when early humans, armed with knowledge, passed down through generations, understood that the success of their community rested on the collective effort of everyone working together. The idea of working the land as a group wasn't just an economic necessity, it also shaped social relationships. In early societies, tasks like planting weren't merely performed out of duty, they were communal rituals that reinforced social ties. Picture a group of people hands dirty from digging into the earth, working side by side under the newly warming sun. There's a kind of harmony in the rhythm of their movements as everyone plays their part. Some are clearing the ground, others are sowing seeds, and still others are ensuring that the irrigation system is ready for the growing season. These activities aren't just about ensuring food will grow, they're about reinforcing the trust that holds the group together. It's in these shared efforts that social bonds are strengthened and the community finds its strength. The beauty of these early planting seasons is that they weren't only about physical work, they were deeply connected to the way early humans understood the world around them. The cycle of life, growth and death was ever present. The land with its dormant winter state now brought forth the promise of new beginnings. Early humans, aware of the delicate balance between life and death, worked with an understanding that their survival relied on the Earth's cycles. The plants they cultivated were not simply food sources, they were seen as gifts from the earth, something to be cherished and respected. Historians often explore the role of spirituality in these agricultural practices. Were early rituals tied to the work of planting, or did they emerge from the human desire to explain the mysteries of nature? Some scholars suggest that these rituals were a way of honouring the earth, while others believe they were born from the need to ensure successful harvests. Regardless of the origins of these practices, what is clear is that early humans understood their place within the natural world. They didn't see themselves as separate from nature. They saw themselves as part of the ongoing cycle of life, death and rebirth. It was a relationship built on respect, where the earth gave and the people worked in return. An interesting aspect of these seasonal transitions is how many early cultures associated spring with fertility, not just the fertility of the earth, but the fertility of their communities. This wasn't just about crops, it was about the continuation of the people themselves. Spring festivals were often tied to rites of passage, to blessings for the fertility of women, and to hopes for the continuation of family lines. It's fascinating how these rituals rooted in survival also had a deeply personal and emotional component. The arrival of spring wasn't just about food, it was about ensuring the future of the community itself. Even in the context of these rituals, the pragmatic need for survival still remained. People worked this land because they knew that what they planted now would determine their ability to survive in the months to come. But their understanding of survival wasn't just about physical sustenance. It was about the security of the group, the spiritual and emotional support they gave each other, and the deep-rooted belief that their hard work would be rewarded. These collective rituals and practices became ingrained in the fabric of their lives. The work of survival was done together, and in doing so they created not just a way to live, but a way to be. What's also fascinating is how early humans adapted their practices to their unique environments. While agricultural methods like planting crops were universal, the tools and methods varied depending on where people lived. Some cultures may have used ploughs, while others worked the land by hand. These adaptations weren't simply about efficiency, they were an extension of how people related to the land. They didn't just use tools. They crafted them with great care, tailoring them to the specific needs of their environment. The tools weren't just for farming, they were extensions of the human connection to the earth itself. Scholars continue to study the variations in these agricultural practices, asking questions about how the tools, techniques, and rituals evolved in different regions. Were these methods developed independently, or were they part of a shared knowledge system passed down through generations? While the answers remain elusive, one thing is certain. Early humans didn't simply exist on the land they engaged with. It shaped it and worked alongside it to secure their future. Their understanding of the land wasn't just about survival, it was about a deep reciprocal relationship that ensured both the earth and the people would continue to thrive. As you sit back in the warmth of modern life, it's easy to forget how profoundly the cycles of nature shape the lives of early humans. Today, the Earth's rhythms are something we take for granted. We plant crops, we enjoy the beauty of the changing seasons, and we reap the benefits without a second thought. But for early humans, the arrival of spring wasn't just a pleasant change, it was a life-changing event. It was a chance to work to connect and to renew their bond with the earth that sustained them. As the days grow longer and the world begins to awaken from the cold, there's a shift in the way people approach the world around them. The harshness of winter which once defined their existence now gives way to a different rhythm. The air feels warmer, the earth softer, and the sun begins to stretch its rays over the land once more. For early humans, this was a time to celebrate the return of warmth, but it was also a time to recognize the challenges that spring brought with it. The thaw was not just a relief from the cold, it was the beginning of another season of hard work, another cycle of survival. With the return of spring, the days became filled with action. The planting season was now in full swing, and the work of sowing, nurturing, and preparing for the harvest was a community effort. You could imagine the early humans working side by side, their hands in the soil planting the seeds that would sustain them in the months ahead. But the work didn't stop there. The community needed to come together for more than just planting. The rituals of spring, the celebrations, the feasts all served a dual purpose. They reinforced the social bonds that were essential for survival and ensured that the land's fertility was honoured. Every act of planting, every gesture of thanksgiving was part of a larger cultural framework that connected people to their environment in a deeply spiritual way. For the early societies that depended on farming, the arrival of spring marked more than just the start of a new season. It was a time when the entire community focused its efforts on preparing for the future. Early human settlements knew that the work done in these early months would determine their success or failure in the coming year. There were no guarantees. The weather could be unpredictable, pests could destroy crops, and natural disasters could wipe out entire harvests. But spring was also a season of hope, a time when the promise of abundance filled the air. The delicate balance between survival and prosperity rested in the hands of the people who worked the land and the community that came together to support each other in that effort. The physical act of planting wasn't just about working the soil, it was a connection to the land itself. Early humans understood that survival required a deep knowledge of the environment. They learned to read the land, to recognize the patterns in the weather, and to predict when the soil would be ready for planting. Some may have relied on celestial markers like the position of the stars or the movement of the sun to guide their planting schedules. The seasons weren't just a backdrop for survival, they were an integral part of life's rhythm. People lived and worked with an awareness of how every action they took in the spring would impact their ability to survive in the coming months. Interestingly, the role of women in early agricultural societies often revolved around the planting and harvesting cycles. While the exact social structures of these early communities remain unclear, many scholars believe that women played a central role in agricultural work, particularly in the sowing and gathering of crops. Some even suggest that women were responsible for the earliest domestication of plants, using their knowledge of the land to cultivate and improve crops for future generations. The idea that women were integral to the agricultural process is reflected in many ancient myths and rituals that celebrate fertility growth and the nurturing aspects of life. These rituals weren't just symbolic, they were part of a larger social and spiritual understanding of how life growth and survival were interconnected. There's a compelling argument to be made about how early agricultural societies saw their crops as more than just food. For them, crops were sacred. The planting of seeds was a spiritual act, a way of honouring the earth and its ability to provide. The rituals that accompanied the planting season were not just about securing the harvest, they were about maintaining a harmonious relationship with nature. This connection was so profound that many ancient cultures believed that their crops and harvests were directly tied to the favour of the gods or spirits. The spring planting season therefore became a time of both practical preparation and spiritual renewal. Scholars have long debated the extent to which early humans understood the symbiotic relationship between the land and their survival. Were these beliefs about fertility and the earth's cycles based purely on practical experience, or were they born out of a deeper spiritual connection to the land? Some argue that early humans relied on trial and error, learning over time what worked best for their crops and when to plant, while others suggest that these practices were rooted in religious and cultural beliefs. Whatever the origins of these practices, it's clear that early humans understood that they were part of a much larger system, one that required respect, care, and attention to survive. One of the more fascinating aspects of these early spring rituals is how they were intertwined with the emotional and psychological well-being of the community. After months of isolation, the arrival of spring was a time to reconnect with each other, to come together in celebration and shared purpose. The hard work of planting was not only a physical task, but also an emotional one. There was something incredibly uplifting about planting the first seeds of the season, about knowing that the work of your hands would ensure the survival of your family, your community, and your way of life. It was a time when every person, regardless of their role in society, was contributing to something larger than themselves. Spring, then, was more than just a season. It was a catalyst for Chun, a time to renew one's connection to the earth and to each other. It was the moment when the struggles of winter gave way to the promise of new life, of growth and of abundance. The lessons of survival learned during the cold months were now put to the test. Early humans had learned how to endure the harshest winters, and now they were learning how to thrive in the warmth that followed. They had learned that survival was not just about waiting for the seasons to change, it was about working with them, adapting to them, and finding meaning in their cycles. As you settle into the comfort of your modern life, it's easy to forget that the cycles of nature still shape the way we live. The changing of the seasons may not carry the same weight as it did for early humans, but their understanding of the land, their reverence for the cycles of life and death continues to influence how we relate to the world around us. It's a reminder that no matter how much we've evolved, the land that sustains us is still at the heart of everything we do. As the warmth of spring gradually takes full hold of the land, a sense of calm begins to settle over the world of war. The once barren earth, which seemed to be holding its breath throughout the long winter, is now filled with life. Flowers bloom, animals return to their familiar territories, and the once icy rivers now flow freely, carrying with them the promise of renewal. The air is filled with the earthy scent of wet soil, the sound of birds singing, and the sight of young plants pushing through the earth. It is a time of growth, not just for the plants and animals, but for the human spirit as well. With every passing day, the community begins to feel the vibrancy of the season, and with it, a new energy to work, to build, and to thrive. For early humans, spring wasn't just about surviving, it was a time to engage with the land in a new way. The hard work of planting now begins to pay off. The first crops begin to sprout, and there's a sense of hope and excitement in the air. Every new leaf, every new shoot that breaks through the soil represents not just the continuation of life, but the promise of abundance. It's the first taste of the harvest that will come in the months ahead, the beginning of a cycle that, if all goes well, will ensure the survival of the community through the coming year. The work is far from over, but there is a new sense of purpose. The season of hardship has passed, and now it's time to nurture what has been planted. But spring wasn't just about planting crops, it was also a time of preparation. The work of the land didn't stop with sowing seeds. It was a constant daily task to tend to the crops, to protect them from the elements, and to ensure that they had what they needed to grow. Early humans didn't have modern tools like fertilizers or irrigation systems. They had to rely on their knowledge of the land, the weather, and the seasons. The community worked together to ensure the survival of the crops, whether that meant creating irrigation channels, using natural compost to enrich the soil, or making sure that the crops weren't ravaged by pests. The process was labour-intensive, requiring everyone to be involved in some way. It was a collective effort that relied on each person's knowledge, experience, and skill. This connection to the land also had an emotional and spiritual significance. Early humans didn't just view the act of planting and harvesting as a physical process. They saw it as a sacred act, a way of working in harmony with nature. Many cultures believed that the earth itself was alive, and that the crops were a direct gift from the gods or the spirits of the land. There was a deep sense of reverence for the land, for the plants, and for the animals that shared the world with them. The act of planting wasn't just about creating food, it was about honouring the earth, acknowledging the forces of nature that provided for them, and ensuring that they maintained a respectful relationship with the land. This spiritual connection to the land was reflected in the rituals and ceremonies that surrounded planting and harvesting. Early humans often performed rituals to ensure a successful harvest offering, prayers or sacrifices to the gods to ask for their blessing. Some cultures even believed that the crops needed to be awakened by special ceremonies in order to grow. These rituals were often seen as a way of showing gratitude to the earth for the resources it provided. The rituals also served to reinforce the communal bonds that were so vital to survival. By participating in these activities together, the community not only worked to ensure the success of the harvest, It also strengthened the bonds between individuals, reinforcing the idea that survival depended on the collective effort of the group. Interestingly, the role of agriculture in these early societies wasn't just about food. It was tied to every aspect of life, economic, social structure, and even religion. The success or failure of the harvest had far-reaching consequences affecting not just the immediate community but the larger region as well. Some cultures developed complex systems of trade based on the surplus of crops, while others used agriculture to determine the structure of their social systems. In many cases, agricultural productivity dictated the power structures in society, with those who controlled the land and its resources often holding the greatest authority. The act of farming, then, was more than just an economic necessity. It was a fundamental part of the societal framework. Scholars still explore how early agricultural societies shaped their social and political structures around the land. Some suggest that early human societies were more egalitarian, with resources shared equally among the people. Others argue that agricultural societies led to more hierarchical structures, where wealth and power became concentrated in the hands of a few. What is clear, however, is that the land played a central role in the development of these societies. The agricultural revolution transformed human civilization not just by changing how people obtained food, but by influencing how they lived, how they interacted, and how they organized themselves. As you reflect on these early human struggles, think about the profound connection between people and the land. Today we may view farming as a routine activity, something that we take for granted, but in the past it was the very foundation of life. The cycles of planting, growing and harvesting were central to survival. They were a reflection of the larger cycles of nature, where every season was a reminder of the fragility of life. In spring, the earth showed its capacity for renewal, for growth and for abundance. It was a time to work hard to celebrate the new life that was emerging and to honor the earth that made it all possible. For early humans, the arrival of spring wasn't just a season, it was a symbol of hope, of rebirth, and of the power of nature to heal and provide. As the sun warmed the earth and the crops began to grow, so too did the community. With the promise of food on the horizon, people could begin to relax, knowing that the future, at least for the time being, was secure. It's a reminder that life is cyclical, that there will always be times of hardship, but there will always be the potential for renewal and growth as well. As the warmth of spring continues to spread across the land, the changes in the environment become even more evident. The once cold and barren world now feels alive with new growth, and the scent of fresh earth and budding flowers fills the air. For early humans, this transformation wasn't simply a sign of the changing seasons, it was a moment to reflect on the cycles of life growth and renewal. The hardships of winter are fading, but the knowledge that survival is tied to the land still lingers. The shift from winter to spring was more than a seasonal change. It was a reminder that life, like the land, has its periods of dormancy and rejuvenation. For early humans, spring wasn't just about the return of warmth, it was about reawakening the earth. The arrival of spring was a moment when the effort of surviving the harsh winter months could finally begin to bear fruit. Early humans recognized that this season of planting was a time to start anew, to re-engage with the earth, and to bring life from the soil. They worked in tandem with the land, understanding that every seed planted, every crop tended to have the potential to create abundance or scarcity. The rhythms of planting, caring for and harvesting crops became part of the very fabric of human existence, and the relationship between humans and the earth was one of both necessity and reverence. It's fascinating to consider that for early humans, spring was not just about food. The rituals that accompanied planting were deeply ingrained in their social and spiritual lives. For many early cultures, the changing of seasons was tied to religious beliefs. The planting season was more than just an agricultural task. It was also a time of spiritual renewal. The belief that the earth itself had a life force that could be influenced by human action was common in many ancient societies. People prayed for favorable weather, for rain to nourish the crops, and for the gods or spirits to bless the land with fertility. This connection between the physical act of planting and the spiritual belief in the land's power wasn't just about survival, it was about reverence for the natural world. Interestingly, some early cultures believed that the success of the crops depended not only on the physical work of planting, but on the rituals and ceremonies performed to honor the earth. Some rituals involved offering sacrifices or prayers to the gods of fertility and growth. These practices reflected a deep connection to the land, a recognition that the earth's abundance was a gift that required both practical labor and spiritual respect. The community didn't just work the land, it worked in collaboration with it, acknowledging the cycles of life that they were part of. The planting of seeds then became a symbolic act not just of survival, but of honoring the earth and its forces. Historians continue to explore the role of religion and spirituality in early agricultural practices. Did these rituals emerge out of a need to explain the unpredictable nature of the harvest, or were they a reflection of early humans' deep connection to the land and its cycles? Some researchers suggest that the agricultural rituals were tied to practical concerns like ensuring a good harvest. Others believe that these rituals were deeply rooted in the belief that the land had its own spirit, ones that needed to be honored to ensure the continued prosperity of the community. Regardless of the exact origins of these practices, it's clear that early humans understood that their survival was intimately connected to the land, and the rituals they performed were a way to both honor and influence the natural forces that shaped their lives. The significance of these rituals extended beyond the immediate needs of survival. For early human communities, these practices reinforced social cohesion, reinforcing the idea that survival depended on the collective effort of the group. The work of planting wasn't an isolated task, it was a communal effort that brought people together, creating bonds and strengthening the social fabric of the community. These ritual celebrations and shared tasks served to remind everyone that their collective survival rested not just on physical labor, but on their unity and their shared understanding of the earth's power. Looking back on these ancient practices, it's remarkable to see how deeply rooted the connection between humans and the land was. In modern times, it's easy to take for granted the ease with which we access food, the technologies that allow us to plant and harvest with precision. But for early humans, every planting season was a matter of life and death. The work they did in the spring, the effort they put into nurturing the land, determined whether the community would thrive or face hardship in the months to come. Their relationship with the earth was one of deep respect built on centuries of observation and adaptation. They knew the land's rhythms, understood its cycles, and worked in harmony with it. What is striking is the way that this ancient connection to the land continued to influence human culture for centuries to come. While agricultural practices evolved, the fundamental understanding of working with the earth remained constant. Early humans didn't just cultivate food, they cultivated a relationship with the natural world, one that would shape cultures, beliefs, and societies for generations. The rituals of planting, the ceremonies to honor the earth, were not just about ensuring a successful harvest. They were about recognizing that humans were not separate from nature, but part of its ongoing cycle. This sense of connection to the land, this understanding of life's rhythms, continues to shape our understanding of the world today. As you sit back in the comfort of modern life, it's easy to forget how much early humans relied on their connection to the land to survive. But it's important to remember that everything we enjoy today, our homes, our food, our communities, has its roots in the cycles of nature that early humans had to navigate. Their wisdom, their respect for the land, and their belief in the seasons as a force of life were central to the way they lived. In many ways, we continue to honor those same principles, whether consciously or not. The work of the land, the rituals that accompany it, and the respect for nature's cycles are a legacy of survival, of adaptation, and of human resilience that spans millennia. As the earth continues to wake from its winter slumber, the transformation feels almost magical. What was once a barren, frozen landscape is now alive with the sounds and sights of spring. The air is warmer, the sky clearer, and everything feels more vibrant. The days stretch longer, and with each passing moment you feel more connected to the land and its cycles. For early humans, this was the most crucial time of year. The promise of survival was written in the soil, and every day was a step toward the abundance of the harvest. It wasn't just the physical work of planting that defined this season, it was the emotional and spiritual renewal that came with the return of life to the land. The collective effort to plant the seeds for the coming months was a reminder that life, no matter how hard it had been, was always capable of renewal. The return of spring wasn't simply a shift in temperature or landscape, and it was an awakening of the human spirit. The long cold winter had forced communities into a kind of hibernation. People huddled together, conserving energy and resources, waiting for the thaw. Now, with the warmth of the sun, the thaw represented more than just a change in weather, it symbolized hope. It was as if the earth itself had turned a page ready to begin the next chapter of growth, and early humans understood that their survival depended on their ability to meet that change with the same resilience. What's remarkable about spring, especially for early agricultural societies, is how it wasn't just about survival, it was about the future. Spring was the time to prepare to sow and to nurture what would grow. The work was hard and it wasn't guaranteed. You could plant with all the care in the world, only to have a storm drought or unexpected frost ruin your crops. Still, spring was a time of anticipation. It held the promise of abundance, of fruitfulness, and of prosperity. This was the season when people began to see the rewards of their hard work, when the hope that had been fostered in the colder months began to take root in the earth itself. For early communities, this season also marked a time of social unity. The work required for the planting and nurturing of crops wasn't something that could be done alone. People came together to share the labour and the responsibility. There was a sense of collective effort in every action, from tilling the soil to harvesting the first crops. This communal work wasn't just a necessity, it was also a way to reinforce social bonds, to connect with each other in ways that would carry the group through the leaner times. Communities weren't just groups of people living together, they were living, breathing entities that thrived through cooperation, trust, and shared purpose. The planting season was an opportunity to strengthen those bonds, to work together with a sense of collective hope. Interestingly, spring also brought with it an opportunity for early humans to adapt to new technologies and innovations. While they didn't have the sophisticated farming tools we use today, early humans were constantly refining their methods. The plough, for example, was one of the first major innovations in early agriculture. These early ploughs made from wood and animal bones helped make the process of tilling the soil more efficient. The development of these tools was a direct response to the need to maximize the effort put into planting to make the most of the short growing season. These innovations weren't just about increasing food production, they were about finding ways to work with the land more effectively to ensure that every step taken in spring would lead to a successful harvest. Historians often explore the ways in which early farming tools and techniques evolved in response to the challenges of the environment. Some suggest that these innovations were driven by trial and error, with people learning over generations what worked best for their particular landscape. Others argue that early agricultural societies were influenced by neighbouring cultures exchanging knowledge and tools to improve farming practices. Regardless of the origins of these tools, what is clear is that early humans were innovative. They adapted their methods to their environment, always looking for better ways to work the land and ensure that their community would thrive. The planting season also brought with it the need to plan ahead. Early humans understood that the success of their crops in the spring wasn't just about the effort they put into planting, it was about what came after. They had to protect their crops, ensuring that they would be able to harvest them in the fall. This meant dealing with pests, unpredictable weather, and the threat of disease. The constant need to be vigilant to ensure that the crops would survive and thrive shaped the way early societies operated. It wasn't just about planting and hoping for the best. It was about managing the land, knowing when to act, when to wait, and when to adjust based on the needs of the crops. Interestingly, the challenge of protecting crops extended beyond physical means. Early humans also had to rely on spiritual practices to ensure the success of their harvests. Some cultures would hold rituals or ceremonies to protect their crops, offering prayers to the gods or spirits to ensure the land remained fertile. These rituals were often tied to the agricultural calendar, marking the beginning of planting and the approaching harvest. While these practices were deeply spiritual, they also reflected the understanding that the success of the crops was not solely in the hands of the people, it was also influenced by forces beyond their control. In this way, early humans found comfort in their connection to the divine and the earth. As you reflect on these early agricultural practices, it's easy to see how the cycles of nature shaped not only the physical survival of early humans, but also their cultural and social structures. The act of planting, of nurturing the land, was deeply interwoven with the ways in which early societies functioned. It was a collective effort, one that brought people together and connected them to the earth in ways that were both practical and spiritual. The rituals, the work, the tools, and the innovations all came together to ensure survival not just for the individual but for the community as a whole. Spring was a season of renewal, but it was also a season of great labour, effort and hope. As the days continue to grow warmer, there is a palpable sense of anticipation that fills the air. Early humans, with their hands in the soil and their hearts full of hope, worked tirelessly through the spring. Every seed they planted was a small act of faith in the future, a belief that their hard work would bear fruit. The promise of a good harvest hung in the balance, and there was an undeniable tension in the air as each day passed. The work wasn't just physical, it was mental, emotional and spiritual. The success of the crops determined not just the survival of the group, but their way of life. The entire community worked as one to ensure that the season of growth would lead to a season of plenty. But it wasn't all about the work. The growing season also brought with it moments of rest, moments of celebration. The planting wasn't just about the crops, it was about the connection between people. Early humans, despite the grueling labour, knew that they needed to come together to share not just their work but also their stories, their joy and their hopes. As the sun rose higher in the sky, the long days of spring were filled with moments of respite celebration, songs and shared meals. These communal gatherings were not just breaks from the work, they were vital to the survival of the group. The strength of a community lies not only in its ability to work together, but in its ability to share in the burdens and the joys alike. For early communities, these gatherings were essential for maintaining the bonds that would see them through the difficult months ahead. They weren't just social gatherings, they were integral to the very survival of the group. In times of hardship, it wasn't just food or shelter that kept people going. It was the emotional and psychological strength of the community, the shared experiences, the laughter, the stories passed around the fire. These moments reinforced the ties that held people together. They reminded everyone that they were not alone in their struggle, that they were part of something larger, something more enduring. As you sit back in the warmth of modern life, it's easy to overlook the importance of these gatherings. Today we live in a world where the individual is often seen as the centre of their own story. But for early humans, survival was always a collective effort. The land, the seasons and the community were all interwoven. To survive was to live in harmony with the cycles of nature and the people around you. These communal moments were an expression of that harmony, a time to strengthen relationships and renew the sense of purpose that drove the group forward. Of course, the land's cycles weren't always predictable. Despite the optimism of the planting season, early humans knew that their survival was not guaranteed. Spring didn't always bring perfect weather. The rains could come too late or too early. The temperatures could rise too quickly or not enough. Crops could be destroyed by pests, disease, or an unexpected frost. The work of the spring, the labour of planting and nurturing, could be undone by forces beyond their control. This uncertainty created a sense of humility in the way people viewed their relationship with the land. They worked the soil, but they understood that their efforts were not always enough. The forces of nature had their own rhythm, and sometimes all they could do was trust in the land's ability to provide. Interestingly, this awareness of the unpredictable nature of the land led to a deeply spiritual connection to the earth. Early humans often turned to rituals, prayers, and ceremonies to ensure the success of their crops. The rituals didn't just serve as a form of divine appeasement, they were a way to acknowledge the delicate balance between human effort and nature's will. They were reminders that the earth, despite its cycles, was as unpredictable and uncontrollable. In many ways, these ceremonies were a way to seek favour from the powers that govern the natural world. The fertility of the land was not just a physical process, it was believed to be influenced by forces beyond human comprehension. This connection to this spiritual world was deeply embedded in early agricultural societies. Many cultures believed that the fertility of the earth was tied to the fertility of their own lives. The planting of seeds wasn't just about the crops, it was also about honouring the cycles of life, death, and renewal. The planting season was a time for reflection, for giving thanks for the land's bounty, and for acknowledging the hard work that had gone into preparing for the harvest. The cycle of planting and harvesting was intertwined with the larger cycle of life itself. It was a reminder that everything in the natural world was connected, that the land and the people were inextricably linked in a dance of growth and renewal. Scholars have long debated the role of spirituality in early agricultural societies. Was it the rituals and beliefs that created a sense of community and solidarity? Or was it the shared effort of working the land that brought people together? Some suggest that these spiritual practices were born from the practical necessity of ensuring a successful harvest. Others argue that they were a way to help people make sense of the natural world, to give meaning to the unpredictable forces that govern their lives. Regardless of the origins, it's clear that spirituality and agriculture were intertwined, that the act of planting was more than just a physical act. It was a deeply spiritual one tied to the larger cycles of life. As you relax, reflecting on the past, thinking about the connection early humans had to the land and to each other. Today we may not have the same spiritual rituals, but we still rely on the earth to provide for us. We may not always acknowledge the forces that shape our food and our environment, but they are still there beneath the surface. The cycles of the seasons, the rise and fall of the sun, the rhythms of the earth. These are constants in a world that often feels unpredictable. Early humans didn't just survive, they learned to live in harmony with these cycles, to understand their place in the world and to honour the earth that sustained them. It's a reminder that no matter how far we've come, the cycles of nature are still at the heart of everything we do. As the seasons shift once more and the warmth of spring becomes more settled, the land seems to hum with energy. The first flowers bloom, the trees regain their leaves, and the once barren earth begins to show signs of life. Early humans who had spent so much of their time focused on surviving the winter months now focused their attention on a new kind of work nurturing life. The daily tasks of planting, tending, and caring for crops became the bigger priority. With each passing day, hope for the future began to take root quite literally in the soil. The long days were now filled with activity, with people working in the fields, ensuring that what had been sown would grow and flourish. This period wasn't just about physical labour. The arrival of spring and the work that came with it served to solidify relationships within the community. Early humans didn't work in isolation, they worked together. The planting season was as much about community as it was about agriculture. People shared knowledge, lent a hand when needed, and celebrated the promise of the harvest. In this sense, the act of planting wasn't merely about preparing for the future, it was about reinforcing the ties that bound them together. The physical labour was exhausting, but the sense of unity that came from sharing it made it manageable. After all, when the cold had passed and the land began to thrive, the benefits of the work would be shared by everyone. It's fascinating to consider how these early agricultural practices shape the social structures of early societies. In many cases, the ability to grow crops determined much more than food, it determined power. Some communities were led by those who had access to the most fertile land or the most effective agricultural practices. Leadership in this sense wasn't just about strength or charisma. It was about understanding the land and being able to produce enough food to support the group. Early societies had to rely on the success of their crops to survive, And so those who could navigate the complexities of planting, tending, and harvesting crops became central to the group's survival. Scholars still debate whether agricultural societies were primarily shaped by the need for food, or whether they were influenced by broader social and cultural structures. Some believe that early societies were built around agriculture, with the land and its productivity determining everything from social hierarchy to religious practices. Others argue that agricultural practices were a tool that societies used to organize and strengthen their communities, not necessarily the driving force behind the development of those societies. What's clear, however, is that the relationship between early humans and the land was more than just a survival tactic. It was the foundation of their way of life. The cycles of planting, growing, and harvesting were essential not only for food, but for the very structure of society. It's also intriguing to think about how early humans understood the relationship between time and growth. While we take for granted our calendars and timekeeping methods, early people had to rely on the natural rhythms of the world around them to guide their actions. The position of the sun, the phases of the moon, and the changing of the seasons all played crucial roles in the timing of planting, harvesting, and everything in between. Early humans had an acute awareness of these cycles. They didn't just track time, they lived it. Every season, every change in the weather was part of a larger rhythm that dictated the rhythm of life itself. A quirky tidbit. Did you know that many ancient civilizations had systems of timekeeping that relied on the stars? Ancient cultures, particularly those in agrarian societies, would observe the stars and constellations to mark the changing of seasons. This wasn't just for navigation or mythological stories, it was a way to measure the passage of time and determine the right moment to plant or harvest crops. They understood the stars in a way that we may not today, using the night sky as a celestial calendar, a natural clock that helped guide their agricultural work. Imagine looking up at the sky, seeing the stars as not only a part of a story, but as a map of the future, a way to know when to act in the cycle of life. The changing seasons also brought a shift in human interactions with the natural world. Early humans didn't see themselves as separate from nature, they were part of it. The act of planting wasn't just a task, it was an engagement with the world around them. The work of the land was done in partnership with the earth. Early humans understood that the land provided for them, but in return they had to care for it. This understanding was reflected in the rituals and traditions that were passed down through generations. The land wasn't something to conquer, it was something to nurture, protect, and honor. And this relationship wasn't just a practical matter, it was deeply spiritual as well. Interestingly, many early human rituals revolved around the concept of reciprocity with nature. Whether it was a ceremonial offering to the earth, a prayer for rain, or a song of thanks for the harvest, these practices reinforced the belief that humans and the earth were interconnected. The fertility of the land, the bounty of the crops, and the success of the harvest were seen as blessings, gifts from the earth that needed to be honored. These rituals were an expression of gratitude for what the earth had provided, and they reminded people of their dependence on the natural world. In this way, agriculture wasn't just about survival, it was about understanding the sacred bond between humans and nature. Historians often reflect on how these early beliefs shaped the development of agriculture. Was the drive for agricultural success purely practical, or was it rooted in a deep-seated belief in nature's spiritual power? Some argue that the early agricultural revolutions were driven by the need to feed growing populations, while others suggest that spirituality and ritual were integral to the development of farming. Whatever the case, what's clear is that the agricultural practices of early humans were inextricably tied to both the physical and spiritual aspects of their lives. Their relationship with the land was one of deep respect, cooperation, and a shared understanding that survival was not just about physical work, but about the belief that they were part of something much larger. As the earth continues to warm, you feel the deep connection early humans had with the land. They didn't just work the earth. They lived with it, grew with it, and understood that the land's cycles mirrored their own lives. They were part of nature, not separate from it. The rituals, the planting, the communal work, it all speaks to the deep connection early humans had with the natural world. And as you sit comfortably reflecting on how far we've come, It's a reminder that no matter how much time passes, we still rely on the same cycles that have sustained life for centuries. As the warmth of spring takes full hold of the land, you can feel a profound shift. The once quiet, frozen world is now alive with the sounds of nature waking up. Birds chirp from the newly leafed trees and the scent of fresh grass fills the air. Early humans with their hands in the soil continued their work with renewed energy and anticipation. The first signs of life that had appeared in the ground weeks before have now taken root. What was once barren is becoming abundant. The work, while physically demanding, brings a sense of hope that drives the community forward. Each new sprout, each budding plant is a sign that the earth is holding its promise to the people. For early humans, spring wasn't just about surviving, it was about thriving. It was a time of action, but also a time of reflection. The winter had been a season of patience and endurance. Now, with the earth waking up, there was a shift from survival to cultivation. The cycles of nature had always been present, but in the spring they were felt most acutely. Every task, from sowing seeds to tending to crops, became an expression of life growth and continuity. The act of planting wasn't just a means of obtaining food, it was a symbol of hope. A reminder that despite the harsh winters, life would always find a way. Interestingly, it wasn't just about the work in the fields. Spring was also a time for early humans to deepen their relationship with the earth. They understood that the land wasn't simply something to be worked, it was something that needed care and respect. As the earth's fertility blossomed, so too did the spiritual connection people had with it. Many ancient cultures saw the land as a living entity with its own spirit and rhythms. The arrival of spring wasn't only about physical transformation, it was about the spiritual renewal, both the land and the people. The fertility of the earth was something to be honoured, and the rituals around planting were a form of acknowledgement, a way to show gratitude for the land's generosity. You might find it fascinating that in many early societies, rituals surrounding planting were some of the most sacred events of the year. It wasn't just about planting food, it was about ensuring that the land's power was respected and revered. For some cultures, planting wasn't even done until certain ceremonial practices were observed. These rituals could involve prayers, dances, or offerings to ensure that the seeds would grow. In this way, planting was far more than a utilitarian task. It was a moment of deep spiritual significance. These early rituals tied the act of cultivation to the greater forces that govern their lives. The earth's cycles, its fertility and its abundance were seen as gifts, and their people's work was a form of reciprocal exchange with the land. Scholars often reflect on how these rituals influenced the development of early societies. While early agricultural practices were essential for survival, many argue that the rituals surrounding them were just as important. They served not only to ensure the success of the crops, but to bind the community together. The social and spiritual aspects of these rituals reinforced a sense of shared purpose. Everyone participated, whether they were planting in the fields or performing the sacred ceremonies. These rituals were about more than just food, they were about community cohesion, about recognizing that survival depended on the collective effort and respect for the land's power. The emotional and psychological aspects of spring were just as vital as the physical work. After months of isolation and frigid temperatures, the arrival of spring brought with it a sense of renewal that wasn't just physical but deeply emotional. The Earth's rebirth mirrored the emotional and spiritual renewal that early humans experienced. Spring wasn't just about planting crops, it was about re-engaging with the world. It was about connecting with the land, with each other, and with the rhythms of nature that defined their lives. The hardships of winter were behind them, but they had forged deeper connections, and spring was a time to celebrate the fruits of their labour. The process of planting crops also marked a shift in how early humans understood time. The careful management of seasons, the planting of seeds, and the nurturing of crops required a level of awareness and attentiveness to the passage of time. Early humans didn't measure time in the same way we do today. They didn't have calendars or clocks to dictate their actions. Instead, their lives were governed by the natural world, by the rising of the sun, the movement of the stars, and the cycles of growth. Each season carried its own meaning, and each moment was shaped by the rhythms of nature. Spring was a reminder of the cyclical nature of life, a time when the earth was reborn and the work of the past came to fruition. This close relationship with time, with the seasons, and with the land influenced every aspect of the early human culture. It wasn't just about surviving from one season to the next, it was about understanding that life itself followed a rhythm. The success of the crops, the health of the animals, and the prosperity of the community were all tied to this rhythm. The act of planting, nurturing, and harvesting became a reflection of the belief that everything in life was interconnected, that the land, the people, and the seasons were part of an ongoing cycle that was vital to survival. The planting season was more than just a necessary task. It was a celebration of life itself. It was a time to embrace the future, to nurture the land that had sustained the community, and to honour the cycles that shaped their lives. The effort wasn't just physical. It was an expression of gratitude, of respect for the earth and the forces of nature that had made survival possible. Early humans understood that the work of planting was never done alone. It was a communal effort shaped by the knowledge, experience and cooperation of the entire community. Spring then was a time to reconnect not just with the land but with each other. It was a reminder that no matter how harsh the winter had been, there was always the possibility of renewal, of growth, and of the flourishing of life. As the warmth of the sun grows stronger, the pace of life quickens. The once muted colours of the landscape are now vibrant with the hues of blooming flowers, ripening fruits, and fresh greenery. Early humans whose lives were once defined by the challenges of survival in a harsh, unforgiving world, now find themselves immersed in a season of hope and growth. The soil, now full of life, offers its bounty in return for the care and effort that has been put into it. With each passing day there is a sense of accomplishment, of seeing the tangible results of the hard work that was invested months ago. The crops are growing, the animals are more active, and the community begins to feel the lightness of spring's embrace. In this time of growth, survival is no longer the constant struggle it once was. The promise of food of abundance is now on the horizon. Early humans shift their focus from planting to maintaining, from ensuring survival to preparing for the harvest. But even as they begin to relax into this new rhythm, they know that the job is far from finished. The harvest, after all, is never certain. Even though the crops seem to be thriving, the threat of pests, disease, or an unexpected storm is always present. The work of caring for the crops is continuous, as early humans know that they must remain vigilant if they hope to see the fruits of their labour come to fruition. The change in rhythm from the intense work of planting to the more steady pace of tending and waiting reflects a shift in the relationship between early humans and the land. It's a dynamic of constant engagement, one where people recognise the power of the earth, but also understand that their actions, how they plant, how they nurture, how they protect, will determine the outcome. It's not just about surviving in the harshness of winter or the challenges of spring. It's about living in harmony with the rhythms of nature, about learning to anticipate, to adapt, and to coexist with the land and the elements. What's remarkable is that despite the promise of growth, there is still a deep connection between humans and the land. The plants that are now growing the seeds that were once so small are now standing tall and strong, but they are not fully independent. The land requires care, attention, and respect. In many early societies, the success of the crops was seen as a direct reflection of the community's ability to honour the land. The better the soil was treated, the more it gave back. People didn't just see the land as a source of sustenance, they saw it as a living, breathing entity, one whose health was intricately tied to their own. The process of caring for the crops, tending to the plants, and ensuring the harvest wasn't just practical, it was deeply spiritual. Some of the most fascinating rituals of early societies revolved around the land's fertility. Early humans often performed ceremonies to celebrate the growth of their crops and to ask for continued blessings from the earth. These rituals, which took place throughout the growing season, were not only acts of gratitude but also acts of connection. The earth wasn't a distant, inanimate object, it was a living spiritual partner in the community's survival. These rituals often involved offerings, prayers, and songs to honour the gods of fertility, the spirits of the land, and the forces that governed the growth of crops. In return for the earth's bounty, people offered their respect, their labour, and their gratitude. Historians and anthropologists have long debated the role of these rituals in early societies. Were these practices primarily about ensuring a good harvest, or did they serve a broader purpose, helping early humans make sense of the world around them? Some argue that these rituals were directly tied to the success of the crops, while others believe they were more about reinforcing social bonds, ensuring that the community stayed united in their work and their shared purpose. In either case, what is clear is that these rituals were essential to the survival of early societies. They not only helped secure food, but they also created a sense of purpose and unity that was crucial for community resilience. In many ways, these rituals were also a form of cultural identity. The way people interacted with the land, how they planted, how they nurtured, and how they honoured the earth became a defining feature of their communities. These practices passed down through generations formed the basis for much of early cultural life. They shaped everything from social structures to religious beliefs. The earth wasn't just a resource, it was a partner, a teacher, and a source of strength. The cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting is more than just a way to secure food. It's a reflection of how early humans understood the world. The changing seasons, the rise and fall of the crops, the ebb and flow of the earth's fertility were constant reminders of the delicate balance between life and death, between growth and decay. Early humans recognized that survival depended not just on their strength or intelligence, but on their ability to work with the land, to adapt to its rhythms, and to honor the forces that shaped their world. As you sit back contemplating the ancient world, it's easy to forget how much knowledge and skill went into living through the changing seasons. Early humans didn't have modern tools or technology. They had to rely on their deep connection with the earth, their ability to adapt, and their shared knowledge. Each season, each planting, and each harvest was a test of resilience, a measure of how well the community had learned to live with the land. The lessons they learned, the wisdom they passed down, laid the foundation for all the agricultural practices we now take for granted. And as the earth continues to thrive, we continue to build on that legacy, finding new ways to live with the land that sustains us. The days continue to stretch on, and with each passing one, the land seems to become more alive. The earth is no longer just a frozen, dormant mass. It's an active, breathing entity, offering its abundance in exchange for the work and care people have invested in it. Spring, once a distant promise, has now taken full hold. The crops, though still young, are beginning to take shape. Early humans whose lives have been defined by the struggle of winter now focus their energy on the harvest that will come in the fall. But there's still so much to be done. Every day is an opportunity to tend to nurture and to protect what has been planted. Spring's warmth brings not only the promise of abundance, but also the constant reminder that the work of the land is never truly finished. It requires vigilance, patience, and a deep understanding of the rhythms of nature. What's remarkable about this time is that it wasn't only a physical effort, it was deeply psychological. The planting season brought with it a sense of renewal of connection to something much larger than the immediate concerns of survival. For early humans, survival wasn't just about the next meal, it was about maintaining a relationship with the land that could ensure prosperity in the months ahead. They didn't see themselves as separate from nature, they were part of it. The act of planting wasn't just a task to be completed, it was an engagement with the earth, a partnership that involved both hard labour and a deep abiding respect for the land's ability to provide. Early humans didn't just wait for the crops to grow, they actively participated in the cycles of nature. They learned how to manage the soil, how to tend to the plants, and how to protect them from the harsh elements that could undo their hard work. The relationship between people and the land was one of balance. If the earth gave them sustenance, they returned that gift by giving back to the land, by caring for it and working with it rather than against it. This understanding was ingrained in the cultural and spiritual practices of early societies. The seasons, the cycles of planting and harvest, and the very earth itself were honoured as sacred. The act of planting wasn't just about growing food, it was about nurturing life itself. Interestingly, these ancient practices of agricultural stewardship were often tied to spiritual beliefs. Many early cultures held that the Earth's fertility was governed by divine forces, and in return for the bounty it provided, rituals were performed to honour those forces. It wasn't simply about survival, it was about maintaining harmony with nature. These rituals weren't just performed by individuals, they were communal efforts. People gathered together not just to plant, but to connect with the earth in a way that made the work meaningful. The sense of community that came with these rituals reinforced the idea that survival wasn't just about individual effort. It was about collective action, shared belief and mutual respect for the forces that governed their lives. Some scholars explore the role of these rituals in early human societies, questioning whether they were born out of necessity or from a deeper spiritual connection to the earth. It is often debated whether these rituals were primarily about ensuring successful crops or whether they served a broader social purpose. Some researchers suggest that the rituals surrounding planting were a way to align with the rhythms of nature, a spiritual effort to ensure harmony and prosperity. Others argue that these practices were more about reinforcing social bonds and communal identity, strengthening the group's sense of purpose. Regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that the relationship between early humans and the land was one of deep connection, respect, and interdependence. There's also an intriguing question about how these practices evolved over time. In the early days, the connection to the land was more intuitive. People learned through trial and error, adapting their methods to the land's response. But as societies grew more complex, so did their agricultural practices. The rituals became more formalized and the agricultural work began to rely on increasingly sophisticated techniques. Early tools like simple plows and sickles became more specialized. New ways of managing crops and animals emerged as people learned from their experiences and the practices of neighboring communities. The evolution of agriculture wasn't just a matter of technology, it was a matter of culture. The way people worked with the land and the way they incorporated spiritual and communal elements into their agricultural practices became deeply rooted in their societies. The symbolism of spring, too, can't be overlooked. For early humans, it wasn't just about the plants that grew, it was about the belief that life itself was renewed during this season. Spring symbolized new beginnings, not only for the earth, but for the community. The rituals of planting, the care of crops, and the connection to the earth weren't just about ensuring food for the future. They were about maintaining a sense of hope, of belief in the possibility of renewal. The act of planting wasn't simply a material task, it was a spiritual one. Early humans understood that the earth was alive, and that by participating in its cycles they could ensure their own survival. But this wasn't just about physical sustenance, it was about the emotional and spiritual nourishment that came from working with the earth, from being part of a community, and from sharing in the labour of survival. As you reflect on these ancient practices, it's easy to see how the cycles of nature shape not only the way early humans lived, but also the way they thought about the world. The rhythms of planting and harvest, the spiritual significance of the earth's cycles, and the communal effort that went into cultivating the land were all part of a larger worldview. Early humans understood that they were part of something bigger than themselves, and that their survival was intertwined with the natural world. The work of the land was never just about survival, it was about honouring the forces of nature and the community that depended on them. As the warmth of spring gradually gives way to the full bloom of summer, the land continues to pulse with life. The once barren fields that were covered in frost now flourish with green, and the work that began with the first thaw is starting to show results. Early humans still working side by side can see the fruits of their labour in the rows of crops that stretch across the land. The once fragile sprouts have now grown into sturdy plants, their leaves reaching toward the sky. What began as small seeds of hope planted in the cold earth has now blossomed into the promise of abundance. Every plant is a reflection of the community's collective effort, of the care, patience and resilience that was poured into the land. But as the crops grow, so too does the need for vigilance. Early humans knew that the work wasn't over. While the land had responded to their efforts, it wasn't yet time to relax. The summer months brought with them new challenges: pests, disease, droughts, and unpredictable weather. The work of tending to the crops was an ongoing effort that required constant attention. Every day brought with it a new set of tasks: watering, weeding, protecting the crops from harm. There was no guarantee that the hard work would pay off. The harvest was still months away, and the risk of failure was ever present. Yet the community worked on each individual playing their part, all with the shared goal of ensuring a successful harvest. This period of tending, of care and maintenance was crucial not only for the crops but for the community itself. Early human societies didn't just work together to plant, they worked together to protect and nurture what they had planted. The act of caring for the land wasn't just a necessity, it was a shared responsibility, one that bound the community together. The success of the harvest was not dependent on any single individual, but on the collective effort of everyone involved. Whether it was guarding the fields from pests, ensuring the crops had enough water, or simply providing the moral support needed during the long hot days, everyone played a part. This communal effort was central to the survival of early societies. It was a reminder that while individual effort mattered, the strength of the group was what truly determined success. The connection between the people and the land during this time was as much emotional as it was physical. The land had become a part of the community's identity, a source of pride and hope. People didn't just see the earth as a resource, they saw it as a partner. The crops they planted were not just a means of survival, they were a reflection of the land's ability to provide. This connection to the land was evident in the way early humans talked about it, in the rituals they performed to honour it, and in the way they approached the work of the season. The land wasn't simply a place to plant seeds, it was a living entity, one that responded to care and attention. People had learned to work with it to nurture it, and in return the land provided them with sustenance. Interestingly, many cultures saw the crops as an extension of themselves. The act of planting and tending to the crops wasn't just about growing food, it was about ensuring the continuation of life. The crops were seen as vital to the future of the community, and their success was intertwined with the community's survival. In many ancient cultures, the crops weren't just plants, they were a reflection of the people's connection to the divine. The fertility of the earth, the health of the crops, and the success of the harvest were all tied to the blessings of the gods or spirits that governed the land. The act of tending to the crops was therefore both a physical task and a spiritual one that required respect, gratitude, and reverence. Scholars continue to study the ways in which early humans viewed their relationship with the land and the divine. Did they truly see the crops as an offering to the gods, or was the act of tending to them more practical, tied to the immediate need for survival? Some argue that early agricultural practices were grounded in the practical need for food, while others suggest that these practices were influenced by religious and cultural beliefs. Whatever the true origins, what is clear is that early humans saw the act of farming as a deeply spiritual one. The land, the crops, and the people were all intertwined in a cycle of life, death, and rebirth. While the crops grew, so did the sense of community. The summer months were filled with shared effort and purpose. People worked together not just to grow food, but to ensure that the future of their society was secure. The act of caring for the crops became a way of reinforcing the social fabric, a reminder that survival wasn't just about individual strength or effort. It was about the collective resilience of the group. Early humans understood that to thrive they had to work together, to pool their resources, and to rely on one another. The land, while essential, could only be worked successfully with the effort of the whole community. As you reflect on these ancient practices, it's fascinating to consider how much early humans relied on the land for survival. Today, many of us live in a world where food is abundant and easily accessible. But for those in ancient times, every meal was a direct result of their relationship with the earth. The cycles of planting, tending, and harvesting were not just essential to survival, they were the heartbeat of life itself. The land wasn't just a resource, it was the foundation upon which early societies were built. And the work of cultivating that land, of nurturing it and honouring it, was what allowed those societies to thrive. The challenges of this growing season, while difficult, also brought with them moments of profound connection and achievement. Every sprout that broke through the earth was a testament to the hard work that had gone into the planting, a sign that the community's efforts were paying off. The work was far from over, but there was a shared sense of accomplishment, a sense that the harvest was no longer just a hope, it was becoming a reality. The crops were growing, the community was thriving, and the future was full of promise. As summer stretches on, the land begins to take on a new rhythm. The crops that were once delicate sprouts now stand tall and sturdy, their leaves reaching for the sun. The work is far from over, but early humans can feel the rewards of their labour beginning to manifest. Each day brings the crops closer to harvest, and with each day the community grows more confident that their hard work will pay off. There's a sense of relief in this air, a feeling that the worst of the struggle has passed. The long hard winter is but a memory, and now the land full of promise and vitality holds the future. But even as the promise of abundance draws near, there is still much to be done. The crops need tending, the fields must be watched for pests, and the weather, unpredictable as ever, can change at any moment. There's something deeply satisfying about seeing the tangible results of the work that began months ago. The seeds that were carefully placed in the ground are now thriving, their roots deeply embedded in the earth, their stems reaching for the sun. This success, though, is not just about physical labour. It's a reflection of the relationship that has developed between early humans and the land. The land has responded to their care, their respect and their effort, and as the crops grow, so too does the sense of belonging. Early humans didn't just survive the harshness of winter. They learned to coexist with the land, to understand its rhythms and cycles, and to work in harmony with it. The summer months with their long days and warmth are a time of growth and activity, but they're also a time of reflection. Early humans knew that the harvest wasn't guaranteed. They had seen the unpredictability of nature storms, droughts, pests, and understood that even the best laid plans could be undone. But this knowledge didn't breed fear. It fostered a deeper respect for the land and its cycles. It was a reminder that despite all their hard work, survival was never truly within their complete control. The land provided, but it also required constant care, attention, and respect. Interestingly, early humans also understood that their survival didn't rest solely on the crops. They had developed ways to manage their resources so that even in the event of a failed harvest, they could still survive. Early societies understood the importance of storage. The same knowledge that allowed them to grow crops also enabled them to preserve food for the lean months ahead. Techniques such as drying, salting, and smoking meats, as well as storing grains in cool, dry places, were methods that helped early humans get through the winter. The preservation of food wasn't just about stocking up for the months when the land was dormant, it was a lifeline. Without proper storage, the community risked running out of food when it was most needed. Scholars often explore the relationship between food preservation and the development of early civilizations. Was food preservation a practice that evolved purely out of necessity, or did it emerge alongside the growth of agriculture and trade? Some argue that the need to preserve food was a driving force behind early human innovation, leading to the development of new techniques and technologies. Others suggest that the growth of trade networks allowed early humans to exchange knowledge about preservation techniques, making the practice more widespread. Regardless of how it developed, it's clear that food preservation was vital to survival. It ensured that communities could survive the long winter months and the periods between harvests. As you imagine life in these early agricultural societies, it's remarkable to think about how interconnected every aspect of their existence was. Their survival depended on the land, the cycles of nature, and their ability to work together as a community. They didn't just live on the land, they lived with it. Their social structures, their rituals, their daily lives all were shaped by their relationship with the earth. The crops they grew, the animals they cared for, the weather patterns they observed, everything was interconnected. The changing seasons were not just markers of time, they were markers of life itself, guiding every decision, every task, and every action. The summer months with their long days of growth also marked a time of abundance. As the crops continued to flourish, the community was able to reap the rewards of their hard work. This was a time of celebration, of feasting, of gathering together to share the fruits of their labour. These celebrations weren't just about enjoying food, they were about honouring the community's shared effort, the collective bond that had been forged through months of hard work and perseverance. The land, which had been both a challenge and a provider, was now the source of prosperity, and as the crops ripened, the community looked ahead with hope, knowing that their work had brought them to this point. But they also knew that the work wasn't over yet. The harvest would be the final test. For early humans, the changing seasons were a constant reminder of the rhythms of life. Each season brought its own set of challenges, but it also brought with it its own rewards. The cycle of planting, growing, and harvesting was as much a spiritual journey as it was a physical one. The relationship between humans and the land wasn't just about survival, it was about the recognition of nature's power, the understanding that life itself is cyclical, and the belief that with care, patience, and hard work the land would always provide. The act of planting in spring, of nurturing crops through the summer, and of preparing for the harvest in fall became a way of marking the passage of time, of connecting with the earth's rhythms and cycles. The land in all its unpredictability was both a challenge and a source of strength. Early humans knew that their survival depended not just on their strength, but on their ability to understand, respect, and work in harmony with the forces that governed the world around them. As you think about these early agricultural practices, remember how the simple act of planting a seed was not just about survival, it was a gesture of hope. The crops were not just food, they were a promise that life would continue, that the earth would continue to provide, and that the cycles of life would continue to unfold. Early humans didn't simply exist alongside nature, they were part of it, intricately tied to it and shaped by it in ways we are still learning to understand today. With the arrival of late summer, the promise of a fruitful harvest is almost within reach. The crops, which were once small, delicate shoots of hope, have now grown tall and strong. The plants, their leaves full of life, are heavy with the promise of what is to come. The earth has responded to the care it was given, and early humans can feel the reward of their hard work beginning to manifest. But even as the harvest approaches, the work isn't over. The fields must still be tended, the crops watched over, and the weather as ever remains unpredictable. Early humans know that now, more than ever, their vigilance is crucial. They must ensure that everything they've worked for doesn't slip through their fingers. The relationship between people and the land is never passive. In the early months, planting and sowing were tasks of hope, of faith that the earth would provide. But now in the late summer, it's about care, maintenance, and protection. The harvest may seem so close, but it's not yet guaranteed. Pests, disease, or even a sudden frost could jeopardize all that had been worked for. This season is defined by the careful balance between trust and caution. Early humans are deeply aware of the fragility of the crops they've cultivated. The hard work of the planting season has come to fruition, but now it's about ensuring that nothing will ruin what has been built. What's fascinating is how much of this process was guided by the wisdom of the seasons. Early humans didn't just understand that planting and harvesting were cyclical. They knew when the time to act had come and when it was time to wait. Timing wasn't just a practical consideration, it was rooted in centuries of knowledge passed down through generations. This understanding of the land, of the way it responded to different conditions, shaped everything from planting methods to harvest strategies. People knew when to water, when to harvest, and when to wait. This knowledge was shared not just in practical ways, but often in stories, myths, and rituals that conveyed the importance of respecting the cycles of nature. In many ways, the late summer months were a time for reflection. The intensity of the planting season had given way to the anticipation of the harvest. Yet in the midst of this excitement, there was a recognition that survival was never guaranteed. Early humans knew that the land could be harsh, and they understood that even the best efforts could be undone by factors beyond their control. This awareness shaped their relationship with the earth. They knew that to survive, they had to work with the land, not fight against it. They respected the earth's cycles, honored the forces of nature, and adapted their efforts based on what the seasons required. It's remarkable to think about how early humans didn't simply react to the land, they engaged with it. They understood that they were part of a larger system, one that required both work and reverence. The harvest, while a time of celebration, was also a reminder that the earth's cycles were ever present. To work the land wasn't just to tend crops, it was to participate in something greater, something that transcended the immediate needs of survival. This idea, this spiritual and practical connection to the land, is something that has endured through centuries. Interestingly, many early agricultural societies linked their harvest to the broader rhythms of life. The timing of the harvest, the nature of the crops, and the rituals surrounding them were all part of a cultural understanding of the cycles of life. It wasn't just about food, it was about life itself. The crops represented not only sustenance, but the very continuation of the community. To harvest was to gather the fruits of life. This deep, almost spiritual connection to the land shaped how early humans thought about survival. They didn't simply survive the seasons, they learned how to live in harmony with them, adapting and adjusting to the land's moods and needs. Scholars continue to explore the significance of these cultural practices. Were they purely pragmatic, meant to ensure a successful harvest, or were they driven by deeper spiritual beliefs? Some believe that these practices were part of an ancient understanding of life as cyclical, where everything from birth to death, from planting to harvest, was interconnected. Others see that these practices emerge from a collective need for community cohesion. Regardless of the exact origins, it's clear that early humans understood that their survival depended on both their actions and their relationship with the earth. They worked together not just out of necessity, but out of respect for the land that sustained them. What's also striking about these practices is how they often blurred the line between practical survival and spiritual meaning. The rituals surrounding the harvest weren't just about ensuring that the crops grew, they were about acknowledging the divine forces at work in the world. Early humans believed that by participating in these rituals, they could ensure that the earth's fertility would continue, that the cycle of life would continue as well. These rituals were part of a larger belief system that saw humans not as rulers of the land, but as caretakers living in partnership with the earth. Looking back at these early practices, it's easy to see how much of our modern relationship with food, with nature, and with the earth itself stems from these ancient traditions. The rituals, the timing, the care, and the respect all contribute to our understanding of how we interact with the land. The cycle of planting and harvesting, once a struggle for survival, became a central part of the culture, though. The identity and the way early humans saw themselves in relation to the world around them. In many ways, this understanding has been passed down to us today. While we may not rely on the land for our survival in the same way early humans did, we still carry the legacy of their relationship with the earth. We are still part of the same cycles, still bound to the land in ways that shape our lives, whether we recognize it or not. As you reflect on these practices, it's a reminder of the deep wisdom early humans had when it came to understanding the land. They worked the earth with patience, respect, and care, and in return the earth provided. The harvest wasn't just about food, it was a symbol of life, of community, and of the belief that no matter how harsh the seasons, nature's cycles would always bring a time of renewal and abundance. As the long summer days gradually turn into shorter nights, a sense of anticipation fills the air. The crops that have been tended to with such care are now nearing maturity. The fields once green with fresh shoots are now full of ripening fruits and grains. Early humans who have worked the land through the long days of planting, nurturing and protecting can finally see the fruits of their labour taking shape. The harvest, which seemed so distant in the early days of spring, is now just within reach. But while the harvest brings hope, it also brings pressure. There's still much to be done before the crops can be collected, stored and preserved for the months ahead. The work of the land is never truly over, and even as the fruits of their labour are ready to be gathered, there is still a constant vigilance required to ensure a successful harvest. This time of year is a crucial turning point in the cycle of life for early humans. While the anticipation of a good harvest fills the air, so does the knowledge that not all crops may survive to the end. Despite all the care, despite all the hard work, there is no guarantee that the harvest will be plentiful. Pests, disease, or unpredictable weather can still threaten the crops, and so the community must continue to watch over their fields. The collective effort that went into planting, growing, and nurturing the crops now shifts to one of protection. Early humans, knowing that they have limited control over the forces of nature, rely on their understanding of the land and their ability to respond to the ever-changing conditions. It's remarkable how this period of anticipation and anxiety mirrors so much of early human life. The work that began months ago with the planting of seeds is now nearing its end, but there's still a great deal of uncertainty. Early humans understood that survival was never a guarantee. It was always contingent upon many factors, most of which were out of their hands. The rhythm of life, marked by the seasons, was as unpredictable as it was dependable. Early humans didn't just depend on their labour to ensure survival, they depended on the earth, the weather, and the natural cycles of life to provide. This acknowledgement of nature's power alongside their own efforts was a key aspect of their worldview. The harvest was as much about working with nature as it was about preparing for whatever the earth would offer. For many cultures, the harvest was not just an economic necessity, it was a time of celebration. After months of hard work, the community gathered together to reap the rewards of the season. The harvest was a time to celebrate the success of the land and the hard work of the people and the resilience of the community. It wasn't just about gathering food, it was about honouring the land that had provided for them, recognising the cycles of nature that had allowed their survival. These celebrations weren't just about food, they were a way for early humans to connect with each other, to acknowledge their shared struggles and their collective success. Scholars often examine how early harvest festivals and rituals reflected the deeper connection between early humans and the land. Were these festivals primarily a form of thanksgiving, or were they also about reinforcing social bonds and group identity? Some argue that these rituals were essential for social cohesion, providing a moment for the community to come together and celebrate their shared efforts. Others suggest that these festivals had a more spiritual purpose, reinforcing the belief that the harvest was a gift from the gods or from nature itself. Either way, the harvest was about more than just food. It was a time to honour the land, the people, and the cycles of life that had made survival possible. The importance of community during the harvest cannot be overstated. In early human societies, the harvest was a collective effort, one that required the input of everyone. The success of the harvest depended not just on the work of a few individuals, but on the cooperation and effort of the entire community. People worked together to gather the crops, to prepare them for storage, and to share the bounty. The harvest wasn't just a reflection of individual success, it was a reflection of the strength of the community. The food that would be stored for the coming months wasn't just for one family, it was for everyone. And so the harvest became a time of unity, a time when the community could come together and celebrate their shared success. The act of harvesting, however, wasn't just about collecting food, it was about securing the future. Early humans didn't simply harvest the crops and enjoy the fruits of their labour. They knew that the harvest was a time to plan for the future, to ensure that the food would last throughout the winter months. The crops needed to be preserved, stored and protected from the elements. The work of the harvest extended far beyond the fields. It involved drying, salting, smoking, and storing food in ways that would allow it to last long after the growing season was over. Preservation of food was a practice that involved not just practical knowledge, but also cultural traditions. The methods of preservation were passed down through generations, becoming an essential part of the community's survival strategy. What's fascinating is how early humans developed these preservation techniques. The knowledge required to properly store and preserve food was as important as the knowledge required to grow it. Early societies didn't just rely on the harvest to get through the year, they relied on their ability to make the harvest last. In many ways, this practice of food preservation was a reflection of the same adaptability and resilience that allowed them to survive in the first place. They understood that survival wasn't just about what they had today, it was about ensuring that they would have enough for tomorrow, next season, and the season after. As you reflect on the ancient world and the practices that defined early agricultural societies, it's clear that their survival wasn't just about working the land. It was about understanding the rhythms of nature, about connecting with the land in ways that went beyond physical labour. Early humans worked the earth, but they also worked with it. They knew that the harvest was a gift, one that had to be respected, nurtured, and shared. The lessons they learned about cooperation, about adaptation, and about survival shaped the way they lived, and those lessons have been passed down to us today. The harvest wasn't just the end of the cycle, it was a reminder that survival depended on both effort and respect, on working with the earth and acknowledging the forces that governed it. The land, once harsh and unforgiving, now offered its bounty, and in return early humans gave thanks, worked together, and ensured that the cycle would continue for generations to come. As the final days of the harvest approach, the air is filled with a sense of accomplishment. The work that began months ago with the planting of seeds, the nurturing of the crops, and the careful tending of the land is nearing its end. The earth, which once seemed so harsh and unyielding, has provided. The community, whose efforts have been intertwined with the rhythms of nature, can finally begin to reap what they've sown. The fruits of their labour, the crops that have grown tall and strong, are gathered and stored for the months ahead. There is a deep satisfaction in this moment, a recognition that the hard work of spring and summer has paid off, ensuring that they will survive through the winter. But even in the midst of this celebration, there's an understanding that the cycle will begin again. The work of the harvest is just one part of a larger process. The seasons are ever changing, and with the end of one season comes the beginning of another. The harvest is not the end of the story, it's a chapter that leads into the next. The work of preserving the harvest, of storing food and preparing for the coming winter begins now. The community must come together once again, ensuring that what they've gathered will last through the colder months. There is a sense of urgency of knowing that the work must continue even after the crops are harvested, to ensure that survival is guaranteed until the cycle begins again in spring. The preservation of food, the careful storage and preparation is as much a part of the harvest as the actual gathering. Early humans knew that the harvest could not sustain them forever. They had to ensure that the food would last through the long winter months when fresh crops would not be available. Methods of preservation such as drying, smoking and salting were vital to survival. The careful preparation of food for storage became just as important as the planting and nurturing of crops. It was a delicate balance, ensuring that the food was preserved in such a way that it would retain its value throughout the winter. This practice of food preservation passed down through generations was a testament to the wisdom and resilience of early humans. In the process of preserving food, there was also a deeper understanding of the cycles of nature. The work of preserving the harvest wasn't just about ensuring food, it was a way of honouring the land and its gifts. The act of preserving food was a form of respect for the earth's ability to provide. It was a way of showing gratitude for the abundance of the harvest and ensuring that the community would be prepared for the next season. Early humans understood that their relationship with the land was cyclical, and the act of preservation was just one part of that larger cycle. The harvest wasn't just about collecting it, it was about ensuring the continued connection between people and the earth. Interestingly, many cultures also saw the harvest and the rituals surrounding it as a time of spiritual reflection. It wasn't just about gathering food, it was about acknowledging the cycles of life, death, and rebirth. The harvest season was a time to give thanks for the earth's bounty, to honour the gods and spirits that made the harvest possible, and to reflect on the community's shared labour and success. These rituals were not just about ensuring a good harvest, they were about maintaining the community's connection to the earth and the larger forces that govern their world. In this way, the harvest wasn't just a time of physical work, it was also a time of spiritual renewal. Historians continue to explore how early human societies connected their agricultural practices to their spiritual beliefs. Some argue that the rituals and ceremonies surrounding the harvest were integral to ensuring a successful harvest, while others suggest that they were more about creating a sense of community and reinforcing social bonds. Regardless of the interpretation, it's clear that the harvest was more than just a practical necessity. It was a time of deep cultural and spiritual significance. Early humans didn't just work the land they respected, it honoured it and gave thanks for its abundance. Their connection to the earth was not just about survival, it was about a deeper understanding of the cycles of nature, life and death. And as the harvest ends and the community settles in for the winter, there's a sense of closure. The work is done for now, and the fruits of the labour are stored ready to be used in the coming months. The land, having given so much, now rests waiting for the cycle to begin again in the spring. For early humans, this time of rest was also a time for reflection. They had worked hard, they had honoured the land, and now they could rest, knowing that the community had the resources it needed to survive until the next season. The rhythms of life, death and renewal were ingrained in their way of life, and they understood that the cycle would continue no matter the challenges they faced. As you reflect on the world of early humans, think about the wisdom and resilience it took to live in such a way. The relationship between people and the land, the rituals and practices that shaped their lives, and the shared labour that bound the community together were not just about survival. They were about understanding their place in the world, honouring the earth and working in harmony with nature's cycles. This deep connection to the land, to the seasons and to each other is something that has persisted through time, shaping not just the past, but our present as well. The lessons learned from the earth, from the harvest, and from the cycles of life continue to influence the way we live today. And just as the seasons come and go, so too does our connection to the land endure. Sweet dreams.